really appreciate that. We are, of course, having some tech issues because it wouldn't be a training if there wasn't some sort of tech issue going on. So we do have a PowerPoint, but the nice thing about this training is it's actually a really hands-on training, as you can kind of see by some of the stuff put in front of you. So we will get to do like some activities and stuff like that. So bear with us as we try to get this up and running. But my name's Mallory Henry. I work, as Tina said, for Caron Treatment Centers. I do have a little bit of Caron information in the PowerPoint, which we might not be able to show anyway. So Caron, if you don't know, is a nationwide leader in drug and alcohol and behavioral health treatment, located in Wernersville, Pennsylvania, which is Berks County. But we have a student assistance program department and have for over 26 years. So we provide prevention and intervention actually up and down the East Coast. So we're not just Pennsylvania based. We provide services just like the one you're basically going to learn about today up and down the East Coast, which is pretty cool. So one of the nice things about today is that I know I get you guys for two-hour sessions, so we will kind of work through actually our Project Connect curriculum, and you will actually get to take that with you today. So the nice thing is you'll actually get a takeaway from this training. So I've worked for Caron for 6 years. Prior to Caron, I worked in family-based counseling, which is in-home counseling in Bucks County, and then I did go to school for teaching. So I always say that this my job now kind of takes everything I've done and puts it into one little package. I actually did go to Penn State as well, so I'm very familiar with the area. And I basically service most of the Lehigh Valley. That's my region, but I oversee staff that also are in Berks County, Schuylkill County, Lebanon County, Lancaster County, and then I work up towards Carbon Monroe and Pike, as well as New Jersey and Connecticut. So kind of all over the place. But I've been doing work with Project Connect since I started with Caron, so this is actually probably one of my favorite trainings to provide, but I also am a CAT, so I do also do SAP training. And I'm going to have my colleague just pop up if she doesn't mind, because she's going to help me out today and just introduce yourself a little, and I'm going to see if I can make this work. Go ahead.
I have been working with Caron for about 13 months. Before that, I have about...
Why does nothing like me today? What's going on? I can't even get it to restart now. This is my computer, because ours isn't working. It's not the projector, it's the computer.
I wanted to get back into working with youth and having them make some meaningful changes.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting to have that aha moment. You have a grant writing program evaluation business that we do on the side. Stuff that is exciting to me. And I have a master's in public health in health education from the University of Massachusetts. In Amherst, I'm a certified health education specialist and certified prevention specialist. I hail from Eastern Pennsylvania, which, for those of you who know anything about Route 78, is the last one before you hit the taxes in New Jersey. And that's pretty much who I am. I do have a 13-year-old son and a 15-year-old son, so I'm smack dab in the middle of the target population for it.
Is that one going to work now? Then we'll just switch it.
It helps in my relatability that I can talk specifically about rocket league and work. It's really amazing in the sense to you and to me, but I throw a couple words and then I'm going to school.
How are we doing? Still working on tech. Tina's gonna, we are tech gurus now.
Yes.
Do you want to find the ones we've printed out? Here's an extra one. I think we might have one enough for everyone. I typically don't hand out our slides because everything that I'm actually going to present is within our curriculums, but to have you page through the huge curriculum would not really be an effective use of our time. So for those of you who don't know anything about Caron, our student assistance program department runs a lot of different programming. We are the county approved provider in Berks County, but outside of Berks County, we actually do a ton of prevention and intervention. Project Connect is a program that we've been running for over 10 years. We started doing nicotine cessation with adolescents and really found that none of the programs that were out there really we felt like were super effective. Most of the programming you guys I see in terms of nicotine cessation tends to be the very scared straight method of nicotine cessation. And I also use the word nicotine and not tobacco, which tends to be a different in a lot of programming as well, which we'll spend a decent amount of time talking about today as well. Thank you. Is it working? You got to do this. This has got to go in here. Look at that. We're getting there. Getting there. Yes, please. Look at that. It just doesn't like my computer. Thank you, Tina. All right, so, well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Everyone comes bringing gifts for us. All right, so in terms of why we run this program, the good news is that the number of younger Americans who smoke has been going down since the late 1990s. Actually, we don't have this year, 2017's monitoring the future yet, but we do know that the use of cigarettes has gone down by adolescents pretty much every year. And every year that comes out tends to be the lowest we've seen. However, that's cigarettes, which is awesome. But what we'll spend a lot of time talking about today is that's really not what our teens are using. And we'll talk about what are the things that they are using. And the bad news is, though, that over 1.8 million high school students, yeah, the first one, please, are current smokers, and 5.6 million children under the age of 18 alive today will eventually die from a smoking-related disease. Okay, so we still know that there's, a lot of problems with it. We know it's not good. A lot of our kids also know it's not good, but they usually know that cigarettes aren't good. They tend to not know much about anything else. And to be honest, we don't know that much about other things either. So what we're going to do today is provide an overview of the adolescent nicotine trends. And I, in terms of training, really like to have a discussion. So I always say, I don't even know why I didn't even put stuff here in the front, because no one ever sits in the front. But I am going to have you guys work in groups to do some activities. But I also want you to interject, ask questions as we're going, because really this workshop's for you. So I want you to take away information that's pertinent to you that you can use when you go back to your schools or agencies. So please ask questions as we go. We are going to go through the actual curriculum. So you guys will actually all leave today with an actual copy of our curriculum in your hand, which actually sounds kind of counterintuitive that we give away a curriculum that we made, but we really feel like it's good use of our grant funding to allow more people to utilize it. So after today, you'll go through the training, and then you'll be able to utilize the curriculum on your own in your own schools or agencies as well. Thank you, Tina. That's number 4. We're just tech gurus over here. We're going to discuss how you might be able to implement it within your school systems or agencies. And that will help. So again, we've done cessation services since 2001. After using a lot of curriculums, we really didn't like any of them. So we created our own. So the curriculum that you will receive today is a Karen-derived curriculum. And the difference is it is cessation. It is not prevention. So the students that are identified for our group through Project Connect are using some nicotine product. It is not a flat prevention program. It's actually a Tier 2 early intervention strategy. Okay? So we did that. So why is it important? Why are we worried about cessation? And really the biggest reason is because 580 kids who've already experimented with cigarettes become new regular daily smokers. There's a lot of science telling us right now that students who also use other nicotine products, such as electronic cigarettes, tend to actually become cigarette smokers later in life. About 1 out of every 9 children is a current smoker by the time they leave high school. 6.3% of 10th graders and 3.6% of 8th graders are current smokers, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's still a lot in the grand scheme of things. And 10.8% of all high school students are current smokers. And male to females, pretty similar, and we'll actually see that as trends go, as we go through the trends. They stay pretty consistent. Male's always a little bit higher, but not anything that it warrants anything kind of crazy. 16% of all high school students are current cigarette or cigar smokers. And again, when you look at these numbers, a lot of these numbers are focused on combustible tobacco, which would be cigarettes and cigars, because a lot of our surveys didn't start catching on to the new trends until really last year. And even then, they don't specifically ask a lot of the questions, even at like the 8th grade level of the PACE survey. So 31.4% of high school students report current use of tobacco. Nearly 90% of adult smokers began smoking at or before before the age of 18. So we know in terms of use, the younger they are when they try, the more likely they are to develop an addiction to it. So in terms of talking about cigarettes, more than 380,000 12 to 13-year-olds and almost 4 million 14 to 17-year-olds have smoked. Okay? Among high school students, white teens are more likely to smoke than their black or Hispanic peers, and we'll talk about why that's probably true. And then smoking rates typically are higher in rural areas and then also the southern and midwestern regions of our country. Teens smoke the 3 most heavily advertised brands. Any guesses? That's one. Newport? Camel. Yes. Those are the big 3. And while I run this program in a lot of schools, one of the things I hear a lot from administration is, well, our kids don't really want to quit. What teenager actually wants to quit smoking? Most of them do it because they want to be doing it. And what we actually know is research tells us the exact opposite, that most adolescents actually do want to quit. Actually, most smokers really do want to quit, okay? 3 out of 4 teen smokers end up smoking into adulthood, and almost half currently want to quit when they're in high school. A lot of our adolescents don't feel like their use warrants treatment, and we know that in terms of kind of all treatment we a lot of times recommend for youth. A lot of times they don't feel like they're at a point where they need help, so they don't usually want to access it. And the other thing, there's not a lot of adolescent services for nicotine cessation. So if you were to Google, like in your region where they would go, a lot of times some hospital affiliate will have some sort of program. It tends to be one-on-one counseling. And a lot of times, like when I've met with them or called them, a lot of times what they'll say is, we really focus on adults, but we can provide services for adolescents. And a lot of times then those adolescents don't necessarily feel as connected. So a lot of times they don't think that there's any services for them. The other piece with that is a lot of times our adolescents' parents don't know that they use or don't know that they consistently use. And to access that insurance or to get them there potentially, their parents would need to know. So a lot of times they have all of these barriers in terms of actually getting some sort of cessation help. So what we're going to do basically for the first portion of our training today is really go through these current trends. And I've put some stuff in here that's new, so you probably have heard of it or seen it in your schools. But I also want to kind of go through, what trends you guys are seeing in your schools. So before we kind of get into the trends, if you don't mind, just kind of going around and telling me your name and then either what school or what agency and what county that would be found in, so we can kind of get a sense of, what some trends might be in terms of what we see. So I don't know if you mind starting for me.
Sure. Carolyn Bell from Garnet Valley School District, which is outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
And we are seeing a lot of our high schoolers starting with the Juuls.
Yes, I have info on that.
A number of them are addicted.
Yeah.
May or may not want to quit. But
Yes.
it's become a huge issue.
Okay, thank you.
Shelley Milbrand, I'm with Dauphin County Technical School, Dauphin County Air Force Group.
Okay.
We service the entire county, so it's really interesting to see the trends from rural
Always, yes.
and kind of the different.
Yeah, we'll talk about that because it is really interesting. Nicotine's one of those ones that kind of is different depending on where you are. Yeah.
Hi, Franco Fergione. I'm from an intermediate unit in the Northeast NEIU.
Okay.
Near Scranton.
Okay.
And yeah, certainly. I mean, I'm in all the schools doing SAP work, and vaping's huge.
Yep, that it is. That it is. So we'll talk about that in depth because I think that's usually the hot topic that everyone signs up for these workshops to learn about.
I'm Jace Palmer. I'm a middle school counselor in the Pittsburgh area.
Okay. Great. Great. We got a western side of the state.
Brendan Griffey, PA Cyrus, with the entire state.
So trends, just whatever the state's given us. Interesting. Great.
Also at PA Cyber, I'm
Okay.
John Oster, I'm the Student Assistance Program Supervisor, and I'm this liaison as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Stephen White, I'm a prevention specialist with the Dauphin County Drug and Alcohol.
Okay.
I serve as the liaison for the student assistance program. We cover all 11 school districts in Dauphin County, which I know out of the league.
Yep. Yep.
Bill McGee, London Middle School and Prairie School District. I help visit teachers and on the SAP team. We see a lot of it.
Thank you.
I'm Ray Killen, I'm a school counselor in the same district, different middle school, and vaping.
Yeah. That's good. This is good to know. I know where to focus my energy today.
Becky Pierce from Crawford County, and I do work with the SAP
We'll talk about the trends with that. Yep, because that's still there.
I'm Emily Brenner, I'm a staff liaison in Allegheny County, which is the
Okay.
Pittsburgh area.
Yep.
But I don't have Pittsburgh Public or anything like that. But I also cover Armstrong County, which is more rural. I do drug and alcohol education for that area.
Okay.
And Westmoreland County drug and alcohol education through our agency.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
I'm Cheryl Myers. I'm the Lane County drug and alcohol education.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys. That really is helpful for me to kind of know where to focus. So I know we'll spend some time then on vaping. I actually don't spend a ton of time on cigarettes because I feel like most of the time we have a lot of information about that. And to be honest, a lot of times we don't see that much. We still do, but in terms of cigarettes. But we'll start with smokeless tobacco. So we do still see chewing tobacco. Usually, a lot of people don't know much actually about chewing tobacco. It can be consumed orally or nasally, and it does not need to be burned in order to use it. So most of the time, you would take it and put it inside your inner lip, which would be considered a dip, and the nicotine is absorbed into your bloodstream through the inside of your lip. There are two main types, snuff and then chewing tobacco, and every time I do this presentation, I see that little S in there, and I never remember to take it out. But there's a form of smokeless tobacco also called snus, or snus is like the manufactured brand. So snus would be dried powdered tobacco you would package in like a little package that you could put inside your lip, and you would not need to spit, whereas snus is basically Camel's pre-made product of that, and you can put it inside your lip and you do not need to spit. So occasionally I run into that in schools because a lot of times kids can get away with that a little bit more easily because they don't have to carry around anything to spit in. It's also it's not very large, so a lot of times you can't see it. I know a lot of kids when they are in school, it's a long chunk of time that they can't use, but also a lot of times I see like adults using it when they travel, like on planes or things like that, and they don't have access to smoking is a lot of times where I see that because it is more expensive. Especially the Camel manufactured brand is much more expensive. But they do sell it. So this is what snuff would look like. This is dried on top and then moist on the bottom. So the dried, a lot of people don't know that you could snort it into your nose. And then the moist is what we see most commonly, and that is actually what you would put inside of your lip. Chewing tobacco was actually designed to help people quit smoking. It wasn't until we realized more about it that we figured out there's pretty much just as many carcinogens in chewing tobacco as there is in cigarettes. But what we typically see is like the loose tobacco that looks like string that comes in tins. And again, with trends, it really depends. For me, chewing tobacco tends to be more rural. That's not always the case, but that's where I see it more often, tends to be our rural communities. It tends to be more cyclical, meaning it's somewhat of a rite of passage for students. So I get a lot of middle school boys specifically that maybe work on farms with their parents or their uncles or their grandfathers, and they tend to kind of be introduced to it in that world. We have school districts that, they'll tell us that the kids are chewing in school and they're spitting in the corner. So it really depends. Whereas sometimes I go to my inner city schools and they're like, they've never even heard of chewing tobacco. A lot of those kids that I'll talk to don't even know this exists. It doesn't tend to be marketed in urban settings.
I'm sorry to interject.
No, please.
In terms of trends, I've been doing a lot of work recently with student athletes.
Yes.
And the national statistics and definitely the work that I've been doing have seen an increase in chewing tobacco and snus for strength-based sports. Baseball is one of
Yes.
them, but also a lot of kids using these products in the weight room and their strength-based sports because it gives nicotine will give them a burst
Yes.
of energy because it is
Yes.
a stimulant, and it's something to do while they're lifting. So
Yes.
we're seeing an increase among the active size of the college.
Yeah. I've had I've done groups specifically with baseball players, and also wrestlers is another big, yes, another big pocket of student athletes that we see. And a lot of times it's specifically when they're trying to make weight in order to not eat or to curb their cravings in terms of eating, that they'll use chewing tobacco. One of the things, though, when we look at this that a lot of our students, especially athletes, wouldn't realize is kind of what's in that chewing tobacco. We educate them really well on what's in cigarettes and how bad they are for them, but we don't tell them really about anything else. So we know that there's 28 carcinogens, 30 different metals, and there's some of them, you can read them. But the last bullet's always the one I highlight, because I did not know this when I started this, and our students really don't know this, especially our student athletes, that the amount of salt and sugar, especially that processed sugar that's found in chewing tobacco, is very, very high. So I've had a lot, groups of wrestlers that were using, and when I brought this to their attention, they were like, well, that's not true, because they would never choose to use it if they knew it had salt in it, because that would completely defeat the purpose of using it to, satiate a craving. So something to keep up in there. Fun fact. Then cigarettes, all right. This is really my only slide on cigarettes because I don't think we see many students using them. We still do, but just not as much. So we have two different kinds, hand-rolled and manufactured. We went through a really big trend maybe about 5 to 8 years ago of where hand-rolling cigarettes became very trendy to be as a cost-effective way of producing your own cigarettes. I don't run into that all that often anymore, but students almost always bring it up when I do presentations about, oh, I know someone who rolls my own cigarettes, it's much cheaper. But the manufactured tends to be the most common, and again, our Newport, our Camera, our Marlboro tend to be the top three. Basically, the difference between a cigar and a cigarette, we'll talk about cigars in a little, is really just that outside wrap. It's raw loose tobacco. Inside, a cigarette is loose tobacco. Outside is just going to be a paper wrap with a carbon filter on the end. Okay? Now, the difference between that and cigars is really that outside wrap. So the outside wrap of a cigar is actually made from a tobacco leaf. Okay, so it's a manufactured tobacco leaf that's dried. We wrap this basically the same loose tobacco in it, no filter. Okay, a lot of students have no idea that the outside of a cigar wrap is actually a tobacco product. We'll talk about the misconception because when we talk about trends, I would say one of our biggest trends that we also see is the combination use of nicotine and marijuana. Most people, most students specifically, don't understand that combination. A lot of times they don't even realize they're using two substances at the same time. There is much more of a taboo around being a nicotine user than there is around being a marijuana user. So what we have is a lot of students who will get identified for our Project Connect support group and come to us and say, well, I don't smoke, I don't know why I'm here. Okay? And sometimes when we investigate a little bit further, they might be there because they smoke a lot of marijuana. So if I ask them how they smoke marijuana and they tell me, well, I smoke it in a blunt, we can educate them on, did you know that that blunt wrap is actually a tobacco product? It contains nicotine as well. And a lot of times their mind is blown, that they've never understood that, they've never seen that before. The other piece is a lot of times they'll come to us and say, Miss, because that's our name when we run groups, Miss, I only smoke cigarettes when I smoke weed. Okay, well, how often do you smoke weed? Well, every day. Okay, how many times a day? Like 3 or 4 or 5. Okay, so how many cigarettes do you use every time that you smoke weed? Like 2. Like, well, if you smoke weed 5 times a day and you smoke 2 cigarettes every time, that's half a pack a day, okay? But they don't make that connection a lot of times because they're so focused on how bad cigarettes are for them, and they would never do that they don't make the connection that in reality they might be an everyday, every other day half pack a cigarette smoker because they're using that nicotine to boost their high, which we'll talk about as well. Okay, one of the things with cigars is that they don't fall under the same legislation as cigarettes. So there's different kinds, there's different flavors, they're not taxed as highly. These are the 3 kinds of cigars. So on top you have your little cigar and it's next to a cigarette so you can kind of see pretty much the exact same concept except the outside wrap again is going to have that tobacco leaf instead of paper. So it is going to have technically more chemicals in it. and also more nicotine. So that little buzz, that little stimulant buzz that they get from smoking is going to be a little bit more intense with a cigar than it would be for a cigarette. Our cigarillos in the middle are by far our most common with adolescents. A lot of times they don't even know that large cigars exist. They think they're fake for the movies. Okay, cigarillos are going to be most popular brand being Black & Milds for your tipped cigar, which is basically just a cigar with that plastic tip on the end. Black & Milds being the most popular brand. But a regular cigarillo there under the Black & Mild is probably what most commonly they use to smoke blunts with. So they slice it open. They take out, there's this little white piece of paper, and there is a myth that that little white piece of paper contains all of the cancer-causing agents. And I literally, when I heard that at first, I was like, that is not true. No kid believes that. And then I heard it so many times, I was like, really, you guys believe this? Like, you really think that little white piece of paper has all the cancer in it? So they take that out. I had a student once tell me, well, miss, I wash them, and then I hang my wraps dry before I put the marijuana in it. And they're organic and healthy. And I was like, yeah, no, it's still a tobacco leaf. Like, they couldn't make the connection. So no matter how they try to argue with me about it, that wrap is still going to be a tobacco leaf. It still contains nicotine. It still contains tobacco. Okay? Again, they fall under different legislation, so they're taxed less. They tend to be $2 for $1. Almost everywhere I go, they tend to be $2 for $1. That doesn't, and everyone's kind of nodding their heads. They don't have to be sold in packs of 20 like cigarettes do, and they can be flavored. Cigarettes cannot be. Camel actually tried, I think about 10, 12 years ago now, they came out with like a chocolate, and they had like a strawberry, they had a mint, for like a chocolate mint for a while. They did get asked to pull those off the market because they said they were advertising them to adolescents and to children, so they do no longer have those. They can only have regular menthol. But our cigars don't fall under that same legislation. So they are flavored. They can be grape, there can be peach, they can be any flavor that they want. So we tend to see younger students using them. And a lot of times when there's a product that the flavoring is like a fruit, they tend to think it's safe. Okay? They tend to not think. So cigarettes taste bad, so they must be bad for me. But cigars taste like grape. How could that be bad for me? So there's that misconception too. And again, traditionally, our students use them for smoking blunts. I believe in your packet, there is a little flyer of students who have come into our groups and kind of pointing out what products that they've been using. So when you get a chance to look at that, that's in there. But you will see that cigars is actually our number one product students use. I think 60%, Pamela, can you hold it up for me? It looks like that. 0.1%, am I right on that? 60.1% of our students came into group last year with cigars being their primary nicotine use. Vaping, though, was not far behind, okay? But we do see way more cigar use. And then again, here are some of the most common brands. And again, this kind of goes by territory, so I will tell you, like the Philly region, the Lehigh Valley region tends to be the Phillies, and the Swisher Sweets and the Dutch Masters tend to be the most popular. My assumption is that's probably pretty standard throughout because it tends to be more of a cultural piece, like a lot of the hip-hop community supports a lot of these brands, so that kind of leads them right into the hands of our teens and our adolescents. All right, so we're going to do a little activity. So I kind of have activities dispersed throughout the training to break it up a little bit. So Pamela, you can help me out here. Do you want me to pass out? Okay. Oh, geez, yes. Sorry, we have to switch the mic. Yes, question?
The nicotine level is much higher. So you're right. If they're being
mean? Like, you can come up with $1, but I might not be able to come up with $9.75, which the average pack of cigarettes cost right now, which is quite absurd if you think about it. A lot of people don't realize. Every time I go to a gas station, I check it out, and every time I go, they've gone up. So we're almost looking at a $9 average in the United States right now in terms of cigarettes. Like 8 in my opinion. 8, yeah. And to think it was like 2, like 10 years ago. Was the average? All right, you are all going to get a straw, a coffee stir, and a piece of paper, tissue paper. And then Pamela is going to kind of walk you through this little activity. And all the activities we're actually going to do today all come from our curriculum. So you're actually going to get to see them in action, which is helpful if you ever are going to run the program, so you kind of know what you're doing in terms of them. So this activity is helpful.
This is Hold Your Breath. This is an activity that's taken from the first opening minutes of session 2, which deals with the consequences of nicotine, having them self-identify. Obviously, we can stand up and tell them, but we begin to sound like that Charlie Brown teacher, wah, wah, wah. And we need them to experience. They're experiential learners, middle school, high school. Sometimes they don't change into adulthood, but it's easier for them to participate and see, plus it's much more engaging and hands-on. When I'm passing them out, and I will do this as I'm doing this with many of the students that I work with in some of the urban districts. I work mostly in urban and suburban districts. I tell them that I was up all night stealing the straws from McDonald's for them. Then they tell me that's not true because it doesn't have the red and white or the red and yellow on it. And I said, you're right, stealing is bad. Then I also hand out coffee stirrers to them and tell them they came from Dunkin' Donuts. Then they're not so sure because they're not branded. And you'll also need a set of tissue paper, which they're a little confused about, but I tell them I got it from my son's gift wrapping and that they took his present. When they are looking at this, I ask them to carefully unwrap the drinking straw. If you can humor me and go through the exercise, we will have a world-class competition here. I will tell you that the world-class competition is conducted several times a week in my area, and we do have record holders, and we make a big deal about it, and we give them fabulous teen prizes. So you too could be eligible for fabulous teen prizes if you break the record. These are not for making spitballs before any of you go there. It is not a physics experiment. I ask you to put the drinking straw in the end of your mouth as such. Use your imagination that I have one. There you go. Very good. So pointing out when somebody does something right and not using it as a spitball, take the straw paper off, please. And you'll need to take the tissue paper and apply it to the end of the drinking straw, much like, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but I'm going to point Carolyn. Now, notice that she did not wad it up. Notice that she did not wet the end of it, and she did not put a hole and mutilate the end of it. What we're trying to do here instead is, you guys are doing very well. What I'm going to ask you to do is to inhale and try to hold that in place. I'll give you a couple of seconds to practice because, again, there is a competition coming up, and I have my phone so we can get the timers going. So you guys will need to develop some kind of strategy. It may alter your breathing. You may feel a little funny. If you feel funny, like you're too lightheaded or get a little queasy, please stop. We don't need any medical emergencies here at the conference. So if everybody's prepared, set timer. We'll engage Siri. If I could do it right. Set timer. Set stopwatch.
For how long?
Set stopwatch. Okay, if you are all ready, as soon as it falls, please be honest and do not reapply it to the end of your straw because I'm watching all of you. All right, time begins in 3, 2, 1. Do not feel as if you are a loser if your straw paper or your tissue paper has fallen already. Some of you are still going. Congratulations. We have still 2 competitors in the 3. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I will alert you to the record time. We have a winner! Congratulations, sir. And at this point, congratulations. And do you have a fabulous prize for him?
Would you prefer a stress stick?
Which I do not hand out in my urban schools.
Or not all of you, it's not for whacking anyone, or a stress puzzle piece. This is like bendable. No hand vision.
Do not whack people with
Now
it.
you all
Okay.
know that each competition comes with a prize.
Now I'm going to ask you so the world record you were asking is held by an Allentown high school student who was in alternative to suspension room, in school suspension. He held that in place for 1 minute and 37 seconds. Wow, right? I'm going to ask you to repeat the process. I normally, in the interest of time, I would give them a second go because there's usually somebody who will do better the second time, but in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to repeat the exercise using the coffee stir. So again, I'll give you a second or two to practice. It's the same type of thing. I'm asking you to hold it in place. I'll reset my stopwatch. Engaging Siri. Are you guys ready? Do you need materials? Okay. Can we have some materials in the back right? Because I don't want to exclude. At this point, somebody has already moistened the end of the tissue paper and wedged it in and turned so I don't see. But when you have a group of 8 to 12 students, it's really hard to be invisible. Do you understand what we're doing now that you're jumping in mid-stride? Okay. Because you can't win if you don't play. And usually this is a fun way for them to be engaged. Right now they're busy thinking, why am I doing this? But this is kind of cool because I'm out of class and I get to do fun games, which is really what we want them to do. We want them to be engaged because retention is important for the program. All right, time's going to begin in 3, 2, 1. And no one took one last deep inhalation. It's okay, I won't tell your family members. We have 4 still in the race. Down to 3. This is much like the Olympics. And down to 2. No, there is no pressure. When they do repeat the exercise the second time with either the drinking straw or the coffee stir, I do have them turn around so they're not looking at their friends. Thank you very much. That was 37 seconds. So a round of applause for you. Okay. There's a prize available at the front. 1 minute and 5 seconds by a Quakertown mandatory participant. My question for you is, which one was easier to use? Please hold up either the drinking straw or the coffee stir. Most of you are holding up the drinking straw. Why is that? Why do you think it was easier to use the drinking straw? You have a larger diameter which allows more air, which contains oxygen. Oxygen's kind of important to us. I'd like you to think of this as an extension of your bronchial system. Your bronchial system, respiratory system, or the air tube that goes into your lungs. How many of you have asthma? This is where 1 in 4 of those kids, because that's our ratio here in the Lehigh Valley, we have 1 in 4 kids have asthma. So this is where I kind of go into their lung disease, and they're hot to talk about it. If they're not, then I talk about my family situation. Would you tell us what it's like when you get sick with asthma? That's usually the first line. I'm going to die.
Like you feel like it, especially if you start coughing and can't catch your breath.
You can't get enough oxygen where it needs to go. Your chest hurts, you have headaches, and you feel really junky. How about running up steps with a grocery bag? Not going to happen. So what that asthma is much like that coffee stirrer. The coffee stirrer, we'll agree, has a smaller diameter, allows less oxygen to come into your lungs, and is kind of like your bronchial tube when it's inflamed. If it's inflamed, does it get bigger or smaller? It's going to get smaller and narrower. Doesn't allow as much oxygen. Now I'm going to ask you if you've ever eaten broccoli. This is where 3 of them fall on the floor, think they're going to die because of some allergy to broccoli or other vegetables. But you guys know what broccoli looks like. And I'm going to ask you to turn your broccoli upside down. You have the stalk, and then you have the branches, and then you have those little florets or balls on the end of, you have to be careful with the word, on the end of the broccoli. And those florets are much like your alveoli, or the air sacs in your lungs. We're trying to get, every minute, we're trying to get 23, 24 breaths in so that we can get the oxygen to where it needs to go, the alveoli. If you have a smaller, narrower opening, can you get as much in? No. How many of you are on a sports team? 6 of you will raise your hands, and then they'll say, do you want your teammates to breathe like that? Then they'll offer some expletive and say no. And then they have a group agreement that it's easier to breathe when you have a larger diameter tube. When you have a larger diameter tube is when you are not using nicotine. When you do use nicotine, it tends to get constricted, irritated. If you have asthma, it's exacerbated, and things don't go as well. Do you know someone who is older who has emphysema or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or carries the oxygen tank with them? Maybe they do. They can usually relate to somebody way in their distant future who's probably over the age of 40, which is forever. But they can identify with that and how they struggle with breathing, and then they generally will be happy to share their own stories. So that is just one small 10-minute presentation about one of the activities that we use to engage them in the beginning of session 2.
We'll go through the curriculum so I can show you guys where all of these activities fall as well. But then you'll get a chance to kind of do some of them so you can see actually what they're like and get the kind of anecdotal information, if you will, of kind of what some of the comebacks might be or what some of the tidbits the students will give you as you go through. So moving right along, one of actually in our last Monitoring the Future survey, the most used nicotine delivery system stated by adolescents, by 12th graders, was actually the hookah. So again, this tends to be depending on where you are, so based on demographics. So again, in the Lehigh Valley, we have a lot of universities, and we have a very high Middle Eastern population. And when those two things kind of connect, we tend to have a lot of hookah. So there are a lot of my rural schools have never heard of hookah, have no idea what it is, whereas our urban schools, they're found on every single street corner wherever they walk on their way to school. So the hookah is operated by water filtration, indirect heat from charcoal, heating up tobacco, tends to be flavored. More often than not, our students also do not think that a hookah uses tobacco. A lot of times they will tell me, I use the hookah that has no tobacco, it's just grape flavoring. I'm like, well, grape flavored what? I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm like, well, do you get a little lightheaded when you do it? And they're like, well, oh yeah. And I'm like, okay, that's tobacco. I'm like, that's why. It's also much more potent tobacco, which is why you're going to get more lightheaded than you would if you smoked a cigarette. Okay, and I always say we've kind of taken a Middle Eastern culture and Americanized it, and now we have a lot of students and a lot of families who have a hookah as the centerpiece of their dining room table, and they do not just bring it out for family gatherings or holidays or parties. They now use it as if it is a typical nicotine delivery system. I have many students that they will use it in the morning, right before they leave for school, when they get home from school, and it's lit and constantly going all day long. So it's not just something they bring out for function. So I always say we've kind of Americanized hookah and made it even worse for you than it tends to be, but it's very common. We have a lot of hookah bars around us. I don't know if your locations do. Usually where there's a university, there tends to be a hookah lounge or a hookah bar. Technically, you're supposed to legally be 18 to purchase hookah and any hookah-related items. Not true. I was just doing a prevention program in a middle school last week, and I had a group of 7th graders in front of me, and they were telling me that they can go buy hookah, and they do all the time, and you're looking at potentially 12, 13-year-olds. So it's not something that tends to be as regulated as cigarettes. It's not safer. It actually is considered more addictive because it contains more nicotine than any other nicotine delivery system, potentially other than electronic cigarettes, maybe. There is a misconception that the water removes more chemicals than a cigarette filter, so they think it's better for them, which is actually the exact opposite. The water actually removes less than a filter. And the charcoal that's used to heat also creates a lot more smoke. So you're getting a lot more carbon monoxide as well. And the other piece that I always bring to students' attention, but as well to adults, is that the risk of infectious diseases spreading because of hookah use is actually very high. So I actually was talking one time to an owner of a hookah lounge and asking them kind of what their sanitation process is. And they were telling me that everyone gets, your own mouthpiece when you come in. So I kind of pushed the issue and was like, well, how often do you clean the hoses? And they told me that they've never cleaned the hoses. So I always kind of think of like that drinking straw, and I don't think I'd really want to drink out of someone else when there's hot, moist air that you're breathing into a tube. So actually the risk of developing herpes or hepatitis is actually very high in sharing hookahs. So I bring this up a lot of times with adolescents, or the flu, yes, or the flu. I bring it up with adolescents a lot because they don't think about it. A lot of times there's other drugs and alcohol potentially involved when they're at a party where there's a hookah, so they might take hits off the hookah that's not theirs. They might be sharing a mouthpiece, and I always say it's kind of almost like making out with everyone that's at that party. Do you really want to be doing that? So usually they'll say no, hopefully. And then, we talk about infectious disease spreading in terms of hookah. These statistics, hookah is very, very hard to gauge accurate statistics in terms of how much bad stuff you're inhaling because the tobacco is different, the hose is different, the heating source is different, how much you're inhaling is different, how much secondhand smoke you're inhaling is different. So it's very, very hard to regulate. These are actually the lowest numbers you will find, and we do the lowest because it's very hard to accurately get research on this. But lowest numbers, a 45 to 60-minute session of hookah could be the same as chain smoking 15 cigarettes. It has 100 times more tar, 5 times more cancer-causing agents than cigarettes, and 11 times more carbon monoxide. Again, this is on the low end. There are some ads, like Truth TV has one hookah ad out, and they say it's much worse. So again, this is the lower end. And we go on the lower just because, again, it's very hard to accurately get research on hookah use. All right, so a nicotine product that some of you might never have heard of, but you soon probably will. Camel has sticks, strips, and orbs, which are not tobacco products, which is very interesting because Camel and Big Tobacco tend to only have tobacco products. This is not. This is a nicotine-based product. So what you'll see on the right is a nicotine-infused Tic Tac. Okay, they come in a little Tic Tac container. Camel currently has them in test market. Pennsylvania is not considered one of their test market states, so that's why we're not seeing them. But I will tell you that our colleagues who work in test market sites, which tend to be the South and the Midwest, because that's where the nicotine rates tend to be higher, they are already seeing these, and they are running into major problems in schools in terms of policy, which I'm sure some of you already are with the vaping products, of these nicotine products not technically breaching a tobacco policy. Okay, so the nicotine, the sticks are toothpicks that dissolve nicotine in your mouth, so they slowly get smaller as you spin it in your mouth. The strips are, I always remember the Listerine strips that like burn your mouth off when you put them on your tongue? They're those, but nicotine. So the nicotine dissolves into your bloodstream on top of your tongue. Okay. We know that there's toxins in them, but because it's still in test market, there's really no research on what they do to you. But I think in terms of school, it's really good for you guys to have this information because as we know about the electronic cigarettes, trends pop up all the time, and sometimes we just don't know what to do about them and what they are. So this is something that wouldn't flag to you because they're not in a cloud of vape, and potentially they could keep it in their pocket and it would look like Tic Tacs and you really probably wouldn't think much of it. So again, haven't seen them in Pennsylvania, but just so you guys know that they could potentially be coming. Good question. Good question, yeah. I think, and again, it's been in test market, but it's been in test market for longer than I kind of had hoped it would be because they were in test market about 5 years ago, and my thought was, our kind of thought was they would kind of get that same with the flavored cigarettes, and it would kind of be squashed, but it has not yet. So I think with more push because of the electronic cigarette and nicotine products versus tobacco products, I think we're going to see more of them. In terms of electronic cigarette, actually, Philip Morris did stand in front of the FDA this week. I don't know if any of you guys read the New York Times. They did do an article on it to promote their research behind their own electronic cigarette. It is not nicotine-based, it is tobacco, but it is not burning tobacco, it is low-heated tobacco. It's called the IQOS. It's been around, it's been sold all over the world for the last couple years. The FDA has not cleared it, so it has not been in the US yet, but it is found in the UK and Canada. I actually ran into it 2 weeks ago. A colleague of my dad's actually was smoking, and I was like, what's that? I've never seen that one before. So I'm asking questions on it, and he lives in the UK and has it, gets it when he's there. So I'm interested to see what comes. The FDA has not made a decision yet, but I think that impact will be significant when we talk about these electronic cigarettes. But one of the things to keep in mind with that, and I always say, is where the FDA says, sure, go ahead with things, comes funding for research and comes funding for prevention programs. So it might be the only silver lining to the potential of that being cleared by the FDA. But in terms of e-cigarettes, the name of what students call them also changes by the month. So right now, Juul, and I have a slide on that, is probably the most popular product. So some kids will say juuling as a verb, whereas 5 years ago it was e-cigarette, vape pen 3 years ago. It really depends. Hookah pen. It really depends where you are and what month it is, because that consistently changes. So you can see we have all of the things up there. But basically the entire premise is it's an atomizer that heats or steams the liquid, turning it into vapor. It's inhaled, and the nicotine is delivered into your system through inhalation into your bloodstream. We'll talk about the nicotine levels, but they have varying amounts of nicotine, as well as that flavoring base. The base of all of the flavorings, whether they contain nicotine or not, is either a glycerin or a glycol base. Okay? There's been a lot of research being done about what it is to inhale just the glycol or the glycerin, whether it contains nicotine or not. So I do know that Lehigh Valley Health Network was in the process of researching this exact thing of inhaling just the glycol. They were supposed to release their study, but they continue to research, so they have not released it yet. But what a lot of research is showing us is it gives emphysema-like symptoms in the lungs, much like popcorn lung, and I don't know if you've heard of that. A lot of people have heard of that term. Popcorn lung comes from a Missouri popcorn factory, where a lot of the employees of the factory were getting emphysema-like symptoms, shortness of breath, constricted airways, much like asthma. It turned out that most butter flavoring in popcorn is a glycerin or a glycol base as well. When heated and inhaled, creates emphysema-like symptoms on your lungs. Okay, so they called it popcorn lung. So what we are seeing is that exact thing from just the flavoring of the vape pens.
So the disitol, is that glycerin?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, and I have students who are like, I'm making my own, it's organic, they make their own flavorings. It's still a glycerin or a glycol of some sort base. Yes, yes.
So is that disitol in all those products, or like did you say it's a glycol?
Basically, yes. They all come from some glycerin or glycol base that we know of. But again, because none of this is FDA cleared, one of the things is we don't know what's in all of them. And they don't have to list ingredients.
That'll happen in August, correct?
It was supposed to happen 2 years ago. That hasn't happened yet. So in June of 2014, they passed legislation that was supposed to regulate this. There was a big pushback from vape shops. I don't know if any of you guys saw this. Big pushback from vape shops because they wanted to tax them. Because if FDA clears it, then it becomes a taxable product. In which case, it would be regulated in terms of age, regulated in terms of adding tax money to it. And in order to buy in to sell a nicotine product, you need a lot of money. And really the only people that have the money to do that would be big tobacco. So it basically put all the mom and pop vape stores out of business. Now that hasn't happened. So that did pass 2 years ago, nothing's happened. Yeah.
I did say that popcorn lung is irreversible damage they're causing. If they're using it at 15, that is something that they can't fix. So if they continue to use, obviously it'll worsen. Even they stop using when they're 18, they still have that irreversible damage where they will not have the potential full lung capacity. When they're 35, 40, when do we need it now?
Yeah. And what we tell most of our students in terms of kind of rebutting a lot of the things about vaping is there really isn't any substantial research. And I always make the point of how long did it take us to figure out that cigarettes were bad for us? They are growing up in a world where they never knew any different, but a lot of times you can reference them like, 10 years ago you could still smoke in restaurants. And a lot of times they don't understand that because they don't remember that. You could smoke in malls. We'll bring up that you could smoke in hospitals, on planes, and they're like, that's crazy, that's disgusting. Why would anyone ever do that? And we're like, because we didn't know, right? And here's the thing, we don't know what someone's lungs look like if they've been vaping for 50 years because no one's been vaping for 50 years. So what we tell our students is, do you really want to be the guinea pigs? Because your generation is the guinea pigs of all this electronic cigarette use. You're going to be the generation that tells your future children what happens if you vape for 20, 30 years, because you're the first generation that's going to be doing that. They a lot of times will rebut with the fact of a lot of people quit smoking by using a nicotine delivery system or an e-cigarette, and that's technically true for adults. Okay, but what studies show us is that younger kids are using it and then actually getting addicted to cigarettes, because cigarettes a lot of times are cheaper, okay, than a lot of times the electronic like cigarettes that they're using. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but I'll read it to you. If you Google, this is all from Monitoring the Future, all of these surveys. Again, this is 2016 because we don't have 2017 yet, but this is how many students are using vape pens from the last survey to now, so 2015 to 2016. So 8th, 10th, and 12th grade. And you can see they go up every single year because more products are being thrown at them. One of the things that's also really interesting about electronic cigarettes is they can advertise. Okay, so if you ask students if on their Snapchat feeds, on their Instagram feeds, and on their Facebook feeds, they do see videos of other people vaping, which are advertising products or flavoring, which they will not see for pretty much any other nicotine system, especially anything that, like cigarettes that aren't allowed to advertise to adolescents. They do see this. And a lot of times when you say that, they're like, oh, I do see that a lot. They can't even make that connection. And then this little graph right here is asking 12th graders what they put in their e-cigarette, which is also really interesting. So 62.8% say just flavoring. Now this is also assuming that they know what's in it, because a lot of times they think they know, but they really have no idea. Okay, 24.9% says nicotine, 6.8% says marijuana or hash oil, and then this 5.6% flat out said they don't know. Now, what I also bring to attention is because this is not FDA regulated, we really don't know if any of that's true. So what actually research has shown us is that most products that say nicotine-free do have small traces of nicotine because they want you to use it again. And I'll bring that to students and I'll say to them, why do you think they put nicotine in it? And they're pretty smart. They can usually say, well, they want us to buy it again. It wouldn't make much sense if we would just get rid of it and never use it again, right? So they want us to kind of, but it's low levels they tend to be. Now, if the FDA clears it, that's going to change. It will have to be specific about what's on it, okay? In terms of the marijuana piece, because a lot of people will ask this is another way that you can co-use marijuana and nicotine. So you can actually take the dabs or the hash oil and put it in a vape pen and smoke it as well, with or without the nicotine flavoring. One of the ways that marijuana will be medicinally given or recommended, not prescribed, recommended, in the state of Pennsylvania will be in terms of hash oil, so you could use it in a vaporizer. Okay, so not smokable marijuana, but vaporized, potentially marijuana. Okay, this is a little bit more about the advertisements. 7 in 10 of our teens are exposed to ads in terms of e-cigarettes. Okay, so you can see retail ads, internet ads, TV movie ads, and newspaper ads, and then the left is middle school students, the right is high school students. Again, one of the things that we don't, the internet ads, but a lot of times that social media we know is so important to them. It's where they spend most of their time, and that's where they're seeing it. With vaping and hookah use tend to come the videos of like blowing O's, if you've heard that context, or how much smoke or how much vape you can surround yourself with. All of those are advertising to them without advertising to them. All of those things as well. And they pop up on their feeds of, suggested friends they should, or suggested pages they should follow. So other vaping devices on the right is what a hookah pen looks like. So there's different kinds. When they first came out, you had the one that looked like a cigarette. Then what got really trendy was the big box ones, which we still see quite frequently, that literally you look like, I would say like Pigpen, because you're walking around in this like cloud of vape. And then we also have the hookah pens, which tend to be the ones that you buy at the gas station. They're very cheap and they tend to be disposable. So a lot of the more expensive ones are a USB charger. The hookah pen tend to be the ones you can buy for like $3 to $5 at the gas station. They tend to be heavily flavored, and they're disposable. So they're cheap, they're inexpensive, and a lot of times they don't care if they get lost. Whereas the expensive ones, the parents are storming into the school a lot of times to get back because they've been confiscated, and they're quite pricey. I mean, some of the big box ones are upwards of $200, $300, $400 in terms of really nice vape pens. They're quite coveted. They're very expensive, and students are really know a lot about them. They know about the flavorings. They're making their own. They know the heat system that they want to set their heat to, because that's the way they like their nicotine. They know how much flavoring potentially they want. There's kind of two sides of it. There's our adolescents who really get it and really know what they're doing, not usually for the best. I always say if they could channel that in the right direction, we'd be on the right page. But then there's the students who just do it because it seems cool and they don't really know what they're doing. Okay? Most of the time they're about flavor. If anyone's ever been to a vape, has anyone ever been to a vape shop? Okay. All right. So if you've been to a vape shop, first of all, if you ask them for one without nicotine, they'll bring you like 2 options, okay? Whereas if there's probably like thousands of options on the wall, and there's some pretty interesting flavors, okay? They're heavily marketed on the flavors. I don't know if you've ever walked past someone who's vaping too and you kind of smell it and you're like, what is that smell? They have some really crazy flavors as well. So it's really all about that flavoring. But again, most of them have nicotine. Some are refillable, some are rechargeable, some are disposable. The Juul, okay, for those of you who've seen the Juul, you can see the picture down at the bottom. It basically looks like a USB. It really is a USB, actually. That's how you charge it. Plugs right into your computer. Actually, I was with a couple of friends of mine last night, and 2 of them are teachers, and they were telling me that quite frequently the students come up and ask them to charge their Juul in the teacher's computer or laptop. And they'll be like, we know what that is. I have to confiscate it. Is that really what it is? And they're like, oh no, it's just a USB. It's a hard drive. But she's like, all the time. It's constant. It's taken off. It's become a verb. It's become its own thing. We've seen it. Drug trends in general tend to go west to east, south to north. So we're kind of always one of the last to hear about it. So when our southern staff who works in Orlando and Atlanta area running this program tell us about products, we're always like, we'll see that in a year or 2. Well, they've heard about the Juul about a year ago, and we're just starting to see it now. Whereas vaping also in California started much before we saw it here in Pennsylvania. It looks like a flash drive. You can conceal it. For $50, you get the device as well as a Juul Pod multi-pack, which I believe now is like mocha, chocolate, and some other one, and the USB charger that you would need. Each Juul Pod contains the nicotine equivalent of 1 pack of cigarettes, but actually a new study has just came out that's equating it to 2 packs of cigarettes in terms of the amount of nicotine found in it. So again, research is ever changing on this because it's constantly new trends. And it delivers this powerful head rush, which is what they love. Okay, it's that bonus nicotine. So that little lightheadedness you get from smoking, they immediately get from the Juul, which also though means that they're getting more nicotine, which means they're going to be more quickly addicted. Okay, nicotine in terms of addiction is actually equates to about the same addiction level as cocaine. Okay, I always say the one thing that's weird is we don't treat nicotine addiction anything like we treat other drug addictions. All right, but in reality, it's changing the same factors in your brain, the same systems in your brain. We just don't see it like that. We expect people to stop, but we wouldn't necessarily expect them to just stop on their own doing cocaine.
I also don't think that we focus on nicotine, we focus on tobacco.
True.
And in
Yes.
to them about focusing more on nicotine as a drug
Yes.
and not putting it in with their tobacco
True
policy,
story. Yes.
especially when it's coming down to all of these devices that
Yes.
they're using. I'm like, because what do you do with your tobacco policy? They get a slap on the wrist in a Saturday class,
Right.
which I teach those Saturday classes, but still, it's not enough. And so then it's trying to figure out, like, how do you really treat this because you have no idea what's in it.
No,
I mean,
none.
you don't know if it's marijuana, you don't
Right.
know if it's nicotine. I'm like, you have no clue what's in any of these
Yeah.
things. So you're telling them, oh, that falls under tobacco policy, but you don't know what they're doing.
True.
I'm like, put it under your hard policy.
Yes.
Maybe you'll stop seeing
Yeah.
it as much.
It's like a cultural thing. We don't treat it like that. Go ahead.
With the vapes, you see a lot of, my daughter talked about this, she's in high school. Kids chip in for the more expensive ones.
Yes. Yes, especially the Juul because they can buy pods and like interchange them. So they can each have like a pod and interchange.
We got wind with the Juuls that the kids are calling the Juul manufacturer, like customer service line, saying that theirs broke and they get one for free. That they had one, they never
Yeah.
had one to begin with, they're just lying about it. And no questions asked, they're getting one for free.
Well, at least they have great customer service.
So we got wind of that's how they're getting it.
That's good to know. I haven't heard that yet. All right, good to know.
That came from kids.
So then we know it's probably accurate. Yeah, they probably wouldn't lie about that. Yeah, so go ahead.
A lot of gift cards too.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And that's the other thing. It's one of those things when you purchase it online, it's kind of like going to an alcohol website. It's like, are you 21? And you're like, yes. It doesn't check anything. They're not verifying anything. Same with any of the e-fluids too for the vape pens. I mean, you just check how old you are. No one's actually checking. Again, they're not regulated. So there's there's laws, but no enforced laws around it. But again, school policy is a big problem around this, a huge problem. And I know that PDE is looking at policies in terms of this, but with ever-changing trends, it's really, really difficult. But again, yeah, seeing nicotine as the drug and not necessarily tobacco changes it. We've actually been working with a school district who tied in their district magistrate into our cessation programming, which has worked really, really well. So whenever a student violates the tobacco or a nicotine policy, because they've put nicotine within their tobacco policy, it also says any look-alike product, any seemingly nicotine carrying product is included in their policy. They've made it very broad. The district magistrate will actually back pocket the citation if they complete our support group. So the school kind of gets the bonus of like they're doing a prevention, they're giving an alternative to the slap on the wrist, giving them detention or making them pay a fine, instead giving them some sort of prevention programming around it. And that has helped kind of reframe the culture for the school around the nicotine versus the tobacco because their vaping is a pretty big issue, as we see in most suburban schools. We tend to see the vaping partly because it's quite expensive. It's quite expensive. Okay, so that's the Juul, and I'm sure this time next year there will be a new electronic version that we will be educating all of you on because the Juul's taken off, and I'm sure in the next 3 months something else will replace it, much as they do. But that's probably the most popular. Yes.
Just out of curiosity, so when you get one of those and then you use up the stuff, you can just get more Juul pods? About how
Yes.
much do those cost?
I think like they go back and forth. I think they're only like $10 for a pod, $9.99 or something like that for one. Yeah. It however long they use it. Yeah. However long they use it. So, and it's funny. So like when we get kids in group, it used to be like, how many cigarettes do you smoke? It's now like, how many pods do you use a day? Like that's kind of the language. So I would say some students are using, and one of the things with vape that's so hard too, is asking students how much their use is. So with cigarettes or cigars or something like that, we know how much, they can say I smoke half a pack a day. Well with vaping, if you ask them, their answer is I constantly use it, constantly. Well, I can't put that into numbers. I don't know how much you're inhaling. Are you inhaling as deeply as long as the person next to you? And are you doing with something like a Juul where they could use it potentially in school? We actually, one of my teacher friends was joking that she's like, every time I write on the board, we all joke and like try to turn around mid-time to see if we can catch kids using them in the classroom. She's like, because that's what it's kind of come to. It only lets off a little steam as well. It's not like this big ball of steam. A lot of students will use them in the bathroom, but it's just, it's really crazy.
So is there a different product that actually has that huge
Oh yeah, so like the tend to be like the big box ones, like they tend to be like a silver box or like a big long like cigar size vape product. Those you can regulate how much vape you produce. So you can like crank it all the way up to literally it's like you're in this like cloud of, and one of the things is too is they'll say vape, it really is smoke. Right? And sometimes reframing that for them is interesting as well, because they really think it's just water vapor that they're exhaling, but it's actually smoke. Because they're inhaling and exhaling a lot of times the vape as well. But yeah, that's a trend. The Juul does not create much vape though, but some of the other products do. So it really, again, depends on where I'm at. So some schools, it tends to be like our more like wealthier areas tend to be the Juul because it's quite expensive, but those are very expensive. I would say those are the ones that are like $200, $300, $400, the big vapes that create like a lot of the vape. And I've had schools that I've walked in and I've sat with a principal and I'm explaining Project Connect, and he was like, that's great, I'm glad you have this program for this, but our problem is this, and he opened up his desk drawer and it was full of vapes that he had confiscated from people. He's like, well, what do I do with these? What do I do with these kids? And I was like, well, that still is nicotine, so we need to look at policy. That was the first thing we need to do. But second of all, he said that the parents will storm in to try to get them back because they cost as much of a cell phone. And they have to give them back to them. We actually just had a school that had an issue legally. A student had a vape pen in school, and they breached their nicotine tobacco policy, so they ended up standing in front of a district magistrate, and the district magistrate said to the school, I'm not citing the kid unless you can prove that that was nicotine in that vape pen. And the school was like, well, we can't, how am I supposed to prove it's it's nicotine? I don't know. The kid then denied it was nicotine, and they let the student, they could discipline them in terms of the school, but they could not discipline them in terms of the local law. And the school's reaching out to us going, how do we test vape products? And there really isn't anything. There's a couple labs that could do it, but that's not for schools. I mean, no one's sending their vape product to a lab. They did. They did, yes. Still, yes. This district magistrate didn't like them very much. I don't know, but it was actually the same district. They have two magistrates. They apparently do not communicate. Yes.
So how can you put that in your policy, how can a school district put that in their policy so that would not be?
I think they could still discipline them in terms of school. So they could still give them whatever disciplinary action they would give them, but they could not get the district magistrate to give the citation. So the school could still follow through with their policy breach because it did breach the school's policy. It didn't breach technically the local law, though. The school policy and the local law do not match. Correct. Yes. Correct. Yes. Yeah. And our law doesn't really say that.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that too. It still sticks as far as school policy.
Yes, school policy stayed the same. They could still discipline them. I think they're in our group. That was what they needed to do. Yeah, that's still the same. But local law doesn't necessarily, any of our laws really don't match up in terms of the electronic versions to what we have in schools. And that's part of the issue. That's part of the issue. But yeah, I encourage you in terms of your policies to really have those looked at, especially as a SAP team, because you guys a lot of times are more up on the trends than a lot of sometimes our administrators, especially if you don't have a lot of administration support in terms of your SAP team, to kind of let them know, kind of what you're educating yourself on and what you're seeing and why it's important that policy is more inclusive. And reaching out to other schools who do have effective policies is really good too. In terms of dangers of vaping, what we say a lot is there's really just no long-term medical studies. I wish I could give you all the science and the research behind it, but there really isn't any. We really only recently, again, it's been regulated, but I always say that in quotes because it's not really followed through with, and there's no consistency to what's added to them. We do know that potentially e-cigarette devices can also release metals and can have carcinogens as well. We also know that those lithium batteries aren't super effective as well, so there's always these stories of them blowing up in people's pockets or when they're smoking them as well because, again, they're not regulated. Okay. So here's a couple little facts too. Just released researchers commissioned by Japan's health ministry found carcinogens such as formaldehyde in some of the vapor. We also know that the secondhand vapor, there's really less research on that, but some report respiratory irritation or nausea. Pennsylvania's law in terms of vaping or electronic cigarette in public is it's up to the individual establishment whether or not it is legal. That's Pennsylvania's law. So some bars allow them, some do not. Some malls allow them, some do not. It's up to the individual establishment. Okay, and then liquid nicotine can actually be lethal. I always draw your attention to that asterisk there at the bottom. The number of calls to poison control centers regarding e-cigarette nicotine-infused liquids rose sharply every single month between September 2010 and February 2014, from 1 call per month to as many as 215. And one of the reasons is because that flavoring that they place in the e-cigarettes is very, very potent. And this is, again, where some of our students really love to do this research. Some of them have no idea what they're doing. Okay, they buy the flavoring. They don't know what milligram that they're getting in terms of flavoring. They just like that one, and they're gonna, some friend gave it to them, so they're gonna dump it in their vape pen and they're gonna smoke it. But nicotine strengths range from 0 to 24 milligrams. So a regular cigarette, so let's say a Marlboro Red, which if you ask the students, those in Newports are like the harder cigarettes, have roughly 1.2 milligrams of nicotine per piece or stick. So one cigarette has 1.2 milligrams, which means one pack gives you 24 milligrams of nicotine if you were to smoke the whole pack. But if your liquid has 24 milligrams of nicotine, one drop would give you as much as one cigarette. All right, now we're also assuming here then that our students are doing math. Okay, so they're like, well, if I'm a pack-a-day smoker and I want to go down to maybe, 15 cigarettes a day, this is how much nicotine I would need to put into my vape pen. They're not doing that. I actually had a dad one time, I was doing a parenting presentation on drug and alcohol trends, and I was going over vape pens, and he actually raised his hand and told me that he was a 2-pack-a-day smoker and had been for over 25 years. He found a vape pen in his son's room, confiscated it, took a hit off it, and got lightheaded. And he said to me, that had to be so potent, because my tolerance is so high. He said, I never realized how potent nicotine those could have in it. So that's just something I always kind of think about when I talk about that. If the tolerance level being that high, but being still getting lightheaded from that nicotine content in a vape pen. And actually, in reality, some of the vape liquids are so strong with nicotine, if you were to put it on your skin, it does actually burn your skin. Okay, so you have to be like, some kids wear like gloves when they like put their vape liquid in. Questions on any of the products we talked about? Okay, all right. So in terms of adolescent nicotine users, and another thing I want to draw your attention to is we've basically reframed all of our information to be nicotine, not tobacco. But I also encourage you to speak that language as well, instead of tobacco-related diseases or changing that to nicotine or tobacco use in a school. A lot of our schools say like tobacco-free zone, which is great, but we also need nicotine-free zone, right? Things like that, because we say no drugs and alcohol. Well, nicotine is a drug. I like that point you made. That's so very true. All right, nicotine users are more likely to become dependent and use for more years and more heavily. They're more likely to be psychologically distressed and abuse other substances, and less likely to be attached to parents, do well in school, or participate in extracurricular activities. I speak with a lot of parents, and one of the things that hits them is that second bullet. It's kind of that harm reduction technique of I'd rather them do this than something else. And that comes a lot of times with our nicotine use. I'd rather them be using their vape than smoking weed. Or I'd rather them be using their vape or shooting up heroin, because I know that that's an epidemic right now. Okay? So what we need to explain to them is that the earlier they are when they introduce any substance into their brain, the more likely they are to get addicted to that substance and other substances. So just because they're using nicotine at 15, that's actually making them more set up to develop an addiction than less set up to have an addiction. Okay? So in your packets, on the right, I believe, I should pull up a packet, there should be a worksheet in there that says "It's Your Loss" on the top. Looks like this. It's like 4 pages back. I'm going to ask you to pull that out for me. And I'm going to ask you to fill this out. And then Pamela's going to help me kind of have you guys make some more choices. But I'm going to ask you to fill this out. And what I need you to do is one thing per block. Now, this is just for you. No one else will see it. So no one's taking home. This is just for you. You don't have to hand it in. But I want you to come up with 4 important people in your life. Okay? And don't cheat and write like my family. All right? That's probably more than one person. So I need you to give me one person per block. So the 4 most important people in your life. Okay? Your 3 favorite activities. Okay? And hopefully I don't have to tell you that smoking weed is not an appropriate activity to write on this paper. All right? 3 goals for the future, whatever they may be. Okay? Could be tomorrow, could be 20 years from now. And then 2 favorite possessions. So that would be 2 things that you own that are very important to you. You do own an animal. So if you have a dog or a cat, that might be something you own. You do not own another person. So I don't know how many times I get my girlfriend. I'm like, well, that's a whole nother group. It's not my group. That's a whole nother group. But you get 2 possessions. So go ahead. I'll give you guys a few minutes to jot something in each one of those blocks. I feel like we're on a reality show.
Okay. As you're writing down your 4 most important people in their lives, they cannot be me, myself, and I. That does not take up 3 blocks. And again, my parents would be 2 separate blocks. So my dad, my stepmom, whoever is important to you.
I would say if you have to mix the husband or the wife, the kids, we won't have.
Again, we're not sharing this with your family, your spouse, or your employer. 3 favorite activities. I try to deter them from things that involve the police, depending on my audience, sex, and drugs and alcohol. 3 goals for the future. They get stuck on this one a lot. When I say the future, I'm thinking something in the next 25 minutes. It could be something in 4 years, and I give them prompts to fill in. Well, which high school do you want to go to next year? How are you going to get there? And talk with them a little bit about goal setting, but or it could be getting to school on time could be one of their goals. And possessions, many of them don't know what the word possession means. And it has to be reframed something they own. And again, not another person. Some students, this is a very simple activity for them to fill out. Other people really struggle in identifying important people that they trust. So I usually float around the group and kind of offer support or help in having them fill it out. It's very important that they're all complete, and all 9 blocks are complete for all participants prior to me continuing. If you could just please put your hand on your head when you have finished that, then I will not have to float around looking for all of you. I see there's still some people working, so thank you. Okay, it looks like most of you have wrapped up. What I'm going to do is read a number of scenarios, and I'd ask you to follow along. I will give you instructions after I pause and ask you, I will pause, give you instructions, and ask you to follow the instructions. You've been invited to a party. You come home after curfew and your parents are waiting up for you. They're pretty ticked. They find out that you've been using nicotine products. As a punishment, one of your possessions and one of your favorite activities is taken away. You must decide which activity and possession you will give up. I ask you to take your pen, pencil, finger, whatever you're writing with today, and cross off that block of one possession and one of your favorite activities as a punishment. You guys get to choose. When you're done with that, please look up here so I know to continue. Thank you. You will stay out late with friends after a football game, driving around, just hanging out. You end up vaping more than usual. The next morning you wake up and you feel absolutely horrible. You end up not being able to participate in one of your favorite activities. Cross off a favorite activity. Your nicotine use is becoming a problem for your family and some of your friends. Some of them have expressed concern and want you to quit. You don't feel like it's a problem and you have absolutely no intention of quitting. You have to give up 2 important people in your life. Please cross them off now. This is usually where the groans start to develop, and then the arguing, and they begin saying, no way, I can't do that, are you kidding me? But play along, thank you, you guys are very participatory. Although you have a job, a large portion of your paycheck goes towards purchasing nicotine products. Again, this is where arguing about how they get it for free, they steal it, they get it from their friends. You end up having to sell one of your favorite possessions to make money. Please cross off a favorite possession. And again, more groaning. It becomes more audible, and they're following along, but they're participating. Now they're engaged. You end up getting caught using nicotine products at school. You are suspended. Your parents are furious. Give up 1 person and 1 activity. You end up getting really sick because of your use of nicotine. Give up 1 of your goals for the future. How many squares do you have left? 3. You finally realize that you're completely addicted to nicotine. 2 of the squares you have left will be crossed off by someone else, that'd be me, and you have no say in which ones I cross off. Now the begging starts. Sure. Some will take the paper away. Where are your X's? Okay.
I was trying to make it so I could use this again.
Oh, okay.
That's why we're
I will give you a light one.
here.
All right.
Can you give me retirement for me?
Yeah, he's gone. Thanks for pointing out which one not to cross off. You're never retiring. I'll give you your house. Sorry for Mom. So at this point, you have 1 square remaining. And I'll go around. I'll ask you to quickly. Okay, you will have something remaining. What was if we can just go around, please tell me what's left, if you care to share.
Make a positive difference in the life of others.
Thank you. But you own nothing, and you have no important people left.
A stronger relationship with God.
Very good. What else do you need?
I'll build a strong family.
Do you have any family members left?
No.
Oh, bummer for you. You'll have to work on that.
I'm in the same case, help ensure my kid's success.
Is your kid remaining?
No.
I'm sorry for that.
I have my vacation and a new car.
Congratulations. You have nobody to go with, and you'll be driving yourself.
I'm going to go on a missions trip, but
Fantastic.
I have my kids through school, but they're both gone now, so
And you're not retiring, I think.
I have the same thing. I have 1 kid left, so.
Buy a new car.
Thank you.
I'm still moving to Florida.
That's all. You're taking nothing with you and no one.
I still have my mother, and I get to go relocate.
With Mom. All right, there's a dream come true. All right, so at this point, I'd begin to process that. What was it like when I first asked you to cross off something? What was the easiest one to cross off? Was it a possession? Was it a person? Was it an activity or a goal? So we're looking at values and what they value and what they find most important. And even the kids that are so hardened and disenchanted, they have important people in their life that they couldn't imagine living without. I will caution to allow extra time, and it says 10 minutes in here. 15 minutes is not outside normal to process this activity. If they've had losses in their lives due to deportation, divorce, changing family situations, death, they may really take this personally. You may need to make a crisis plan in place for that child at that point. And I've seen it go that way, not in these small groups, but in larger settings at conferences. That's bad when there's a lot of them. How'd you feel about the decisions you made? Was it easy to make those decisions? Because you had to choose, because do I keep my spouse or my mistress? Oh, sorry, wrong audience. Do I keep my first girlfriend or my second girlfriend? Which sibling do I cross off? Which activity? What's most important? Is it my dog or my phone? Nobody's ever asked me that before. Were you surprised by what was left? When we first started doing this, you probably saw the handwriting on the wall that we're going to start crossing things off. Things got increasingly difficult with regards to decision making. When we're looking at nicotine use, we initially have a choice whether we're using or not using. Somehow we went from being non-users. We all start out as non-users, and generally average age of first use being, depending on your region, 11.8 for nicotine products. That puts you somewhere around 5th or 6th grade. And they're all nodding because they know what I'm talking about. Somehow they went into the middle school after they went through their DARE program and said, I would never do that. And then somehow they go through the middle school, they walk through the middle school architecture, and it changes kids, right? They change into these little things, different personalities they have to fit in. And this just may be something that they change their values or their mindsets about. And eventually, it's a slippery slope where they begin to lose things. Not only are they losing things that are identified on that paper, but they lose their ability to make those decisions because external factors play in. They get suspended from school. They have consequences with their parents, financial consequences, health consequences. All of that begins to add up, become a cumulative effect, and they can handle one setback, 2 setbacks, but when the frequency and severity of those setbacks and consequences fall into place, that's what we're trying to illustrate with this activity.
And just so you know, all of the activities we're doing in the second portion of our training, I'll show you where all of them are. So everything we're going to do is found in the curriculum, including all the scenarios, the worksheet, all of it.
This particular one you will have an original copy, so you'll be able to make those copies. But it's found in session 6, and where we're looking at the impact that is not just my use and impacting just me, but it impacts other people. And I might not even recognize what the impact of my use and my decision making is on others, especially their younger siblings. They would never want their younger siblings to do what they're doing at their age, but it's okay for them. When they point out the role modeling, they don't really like it. They'd rather be autonomous, but they're not. And we all function not in a bubble of ourselves, but with external influences. And now back to Mallory.
I feel like we're on a news segment here. So that activity, again, found in session 6. I'll show you guys where that is all found in the afternoon, our second. Usually I do this after lunch. So if I say afternoon, I mean our second session in terms of where that is in the curriculum. But I have an example of that because when I first looked at that activity, I was like, this could be really impactful for students, but I could also see where some of those scenarios don't necessarily fit some of them, so I was kind of like, I'm interested to see how this plays out. In actually the very first group I ever ran it in, I had a girl who actually said at the end, she said, I had to cross off my mom, and she said, in real life though, my mom didn't die, she's not in my life, but I actually don't live with her now because I got in such a huge fight with her about my nicotine use that I ended up leaving because we got in this huge fight. That kind of put it over the edge, and I went to live with my grandmother. She said, and it's not that my mom's not there, but my relationship with her is so significantly impacted because of the decisions I was making in terms of nicotine being one of them. So I kind of reframe that for the students as well. It's not that they're gone, it's just that your relationship with them is so significantly impacted. Okay? So impact, it's like I knew that was coming. The relationship between early smoking and later use of other addictive substances and mental illness may be the result of changes in the brain caused by early exposure. We did talk about that a little bit earlier. Teenage smokers are often more likely to be seen by a doctor or other health professional for an emotional or psychological complaint as well. So in terms of what nicotine does to your brain, it does increase your level of dopamine. So we do know that students use it and people use it in general because it does work. It is a stress reliever because it is going to release that dopamine and change your serotonin levels, so you are going to feel a bit more relaxed when you're done with it, even though your actual blood pressure and your heart rate are going up because you're adding a stimulant to your body. Okay? So it changes our brain receptors, as do all drugs, in terms of adding them. Every time you add a substance into your brain, it's going to create more receptors for that substance, which increases your tolerance or your need to use more. Okay, so then we have increased brain receptors for nicotine, so our brain's going to want more of it, which means we become dependent on it more quickly. Okay, dependence in terms of nicotine is a chronic condition. I always try to talk to students specifically about, do you know someone who tried to quit smoking? What is that like for them? If they can't make that connection on their own, sometimes they can see the impact it had on someone else. It can happen in as few as 100 cigarettes, and symptoms of dependence can occur within 2 months of use. Now let's think about that nicotine potency in a lot of these electronic cigarettes. We're going to see that dependency come much quicker because of that high level of nicotine as well. And we see withdrawal symptoms from nicotine use, because if you've ever been around someone who's trying to quit using any nicotine product, it's usually not very pleasant, okay? So we have this cycle of addiction here. So we use the nicotine, we feel an effect, okay? We either like it or we don't like it. If we like it, we might use it again. It develops tolerance, meaning now we need more. You can actually see tolerance with nicotine the very next time you go to use it. It's very similar to alcohol. First time you drink alcohol, you don't need much to get drunk. The very next time you need more. Nicotine's the same way. Most people in terms of vaping can barely get through one hit. With a cigarette, a lot of people don't even make it through the whole one their first time, but the very next time they go to use, they can get through more. Okay, your tolerance goes up already, which means you need to use more. So now you're smoking the whole cigarette. You're using the vape, taking 4 hits off the vape instead of 1. Okay, and then you're going to feel some withdrawal. Right? Because nicotine hits your brain so quickly, it's only about 7 to 10 seconds that nicotine, it affects your brain, which means it's highly addictive, but that also means your withdrawal symptoms come very quickly. Okay, so now you had this nicotine high, this buzz that you feel, the crash comes very, very quickly. So our kids are feeling withdrawal effects throughout the school day when they cannot use their nicotine product, which is why they're vaping in class when you turn your back, or they're going into the bathroom, because they're feeling the withdrawal effects, so they need to keep using it so that they don't feel bad when they don't have it in their system. It's not an easy cycle to break. Again, it hits your brain in 7 to 10 seconds. Not plugged in, okay? It's also a person who smokes about 1.5 packs daily gets 300 hits of nicotine a day. We don't think of nicotine in those terms, but when you put it in those terms, you're using a lot of a substance, okay? So in your packets is a page on the right. I think it's the first page. It says the change process. Is everyone seeing that? I want you to take this out. I'm just going to have you just for a couple minutes. It doesn't, you need to write long answers. I think I put it back in the bag, Tina. Yeah, I think so. You don't need to write long answers. You don't even need to write if you want. You can just think about it. I want you to think of a change that you've made in your life. It could be health related, could be job related, could be career related, personality related. I want you to think of a change that you've made, and I want you to think about these 4 questions. So just take like 1 minute to do that. No, here's one. Here's one. Here. Yeah. Yeah. It's just not plugged in. By the way, the other projector does have the right cord. This one does have the right cord, so we should work with it. I'll just do the change one because I want to get through. I want to make sure I have them. I forgot at the beginning because I want to make sure they don't come back. I want to make sure we know where they're from. All right. I know a couple of you are still working. But I want you to take your pen or your writing utensil in the hand that you typically write with. And I want you to just find, even at the bottom of this worksheet, and just sign your name like you would sign a document if I asked you to. I want you to then take the pen and put it in your other hand and sign your name like you would if I gave you a document and asked you to sign it. How does it feel? Awful? Was it awkward? So it looks like your doctor's. Did anyone write it really big? You tend to have to go like really big to get it. Okay? All right? That was a change I asked you to make to a habit that you have, which is writing with your dominant hand. Okay? One day when you were like, a year old, you picked up your utensil with that hand and you've used that hand to do pretty much everything with, unless you're ambidextrous, your whole life. So when I asked you to make a change, and if I told you from here on out, you need to write with that hand, how would you feel inside? You put it back. I would cheat. I would feel, a lot of people would feel anxious, stressed. Okay? If you've ever broken your hand and you've had to use your other hand, you know what that feels like. Okay? That's asking someone to make a change. And when we get students in front of us, and I always think about Project Connect and the SAP process going right together, because in reality, we get kids in front of us on the SAP team, and we're asking them or their families or their parents to make a change in a matter of a second. We want you to change because we think that's best. Okay? Or we may know it's best in the terms of nicotine. We know that it's best for you and your health to make this change. But is it acceptable? Isn't it realistic to think that they're going to do it that quickly? If you look at the changes on your worksheet, I'm not going to ask any of you to share, but I just want you to think, is the change you made something you did quickly? Or is it still being worked on? How many of you it took a week to make that change? A month? A year? 5 years? 10 years? Okay. So when we get students in front of us, we want them to change their nicotine use. We want them to make a giant life change like you might have written down on that piece of paper. But we expect them to make it in a much quicker time than we would probably make that change or make a significant change to our life. Okay? So our entire curriculum is based around Prochaska and DiClemente stages of change. Okay? It is not based on scared straight, this is what you shouldn't do. It's based on, it's a moving process to an end goal that may or may not happen in the 8 weeks that they are with us. Okay? Because chances are changing something that significant in their life in 8 weeks is not going to happen. So you can see, I did put in here, and this is all straight from the curriculum, the stages of change if you're not familiar with them. Okay? They're in here. So we have pre-contemplation, and they're actually in our curriculum written as if they are cessation based, because that's what cessation programs tend to be based on. That's where the stages of change came from, was nicotine reduction. That's what they were studying in terms of reduction. So we have them in here, and it gives you kind of like what a bullet point would. I will say that most students come into group in pre-contemplation. They use, or maybe they lie about how much they use, and they really don't want to be there. Okay, is it fair for me to say, okay, by the end of 8 weeks, you're quitting? That's not realistic, right? At the end of 8 weeks, I would love if I got them to contemplation, to think about quitting. All right, so when they set their little goals for me, a lot of times my goal for them is, okay, I just want you to think about your use. That's all I want you to do. I'm not going to ask you to quit because I don't think that's realistic. What my realistic is, if you're in pre-contemplation, is to get you to start thinking about the pros and the cons of using. So you'll see as we work through the curriculum in our second half, it's really just working through these stages of change, okay, which is very different than a lot of intervention programs. Okay? About that. So just a little bit more, early smoking initiation is associated with an increased risk of binge drinking, and more than 46% of current illicit drug users are current smokers. So there is a link between nicotine being a quote-unquote gateway drug, which I always quote because kids hate that reference, okay, but a gateway drug in terms of using nicotine and then eventually using other substances. Okay, and some of the factors associated with youth nicotine use, I mean, mass media is a big one. Whether we're putting it in their face or not, they're seeing it. Youth are more likely to use tobacco if they see their peers are using it or it's acceptable. This is why this e-cigarette trend has taken off. High school athletes are more likely to use smokeless tobaccos than their peers who are non-athletes, and parental smoking may promote smoking to young people. There's a lot of research behind having a parental parent who smokes in the home being more likely, adding to the risk of being a smoker, but it does not mean you're going to be a smoker. I tell students that a lot because it's that self-fulfilling prophecy a lot. Just because your parents smoke doesn't mean you're going to be a smoker. It just means you're at higher risk. So we need to start looking at the decisions we're making, okay? There are biological and genetic factors in terms of nicotine use. So there is evidence that youth may be more sensitive to nicotine and that teens can feel dependence on nicotine sooner than adults. We know that with a lot of substance, that there's research showing us that. Genetic factors may make quitting smoking more difficult for young people. And there is some research being done on a mother who smokes during pregnancy, whether that predisposes a child to developing nicotine dependence or becoming more regular smokers as well. Okay? And then nicotine and mental health. Smoking rates are substantially higher in people who suffer from a psychiatric disorder compared to the general population. And risk may be bidirectional. So this is interesting because kids will fight you on this one, that they use to deal with the stress or the anxiety that they feel. But we're actually seeing that using actually creates more stress and anxiety in students, in turn making them use even more. So a lot of times they'll say, well, I use because I'm so stressed and anxious. But then if you process through, well, how does that create more stress and anxiety in your life? A lot of times they can see sometimes that it is creating more stress for them. So that is where I'm going to stop for this portion of the workshop. I am going to ask you to do one thing before you leave for this portion, is I did throw a sign-in sheet down here. We're going to go through in the second portion our actual curriculum, and I am giving you the curriculum when you leave. We will go through it, we will do some of the activities, and then I will hand it to you. And you can utilize this curriculum in kind of whatever way you choose within your agency or school. You can run the program to fidelity, which is what we ask you to do, and we can provide some assistance with that. So depending on where you're at in the state, it can change our level of help or assistance we can provide, but I want to have your information so that way if you specifically reach out to me or Pamela, we'll put our information up at the end, you can specifically get handouts, or sometimes we can even give you some giveaways, we can give you workbooks, we can give you things if you want to run this program on your own. If you're in a region where we have facilitators, we can potentially come into the school and run it for you as well. So we do have all of those options, but I need your contact information just so I have that in terms of like school building and stuff like that. So if you could just make sure you fill one out. I put one on each table group. There are 3 little spots to fill in. Yes. All right, so we're going to spend this portion of the workshop actually delving into the curriculum. So I did place a curriculum in front of each of you. So if you don't have one, let me know. Failed. So you should each have one to take with you at the end. So I'm going to spend this portion of the training going over what Project Connect is. So I've kind of told you about the problem. All right, so now what can we do about it? And one thing we can do about it is utilize our Project Connect curriculum, which really is designed, again, to work through the stages of change in order to help participants change decision-making where nicotine falls right in that. So it is an adolescent nicotine cessation reduction program. Again, I'm going to highlight it is cessation, not prevention. It is designed to motivate participants to participate in the program, make more positive choices. It's developed through review of numerous adolescent cessation programs, research on the behavior change theory, as well as utilizing prevention and other intervention models. Developed also is guided by feedback from facilitators as well as program participants. So how is it different than other cessation programs is that it's really focused on the stages of change. Kind of like we said before we went to break, in that it's so important that we can't expect a change to happen immediately. I've had schools where we've had facilitators run a Project Connect group, and when they came back the next year, I had a principal say, well, the group's obviously not effective. One of the kids that was in the group is still smoking. So we're not going to run the group again this year. And we had to do a lot of work to reframe that we can't expect things to change in an 8-week support group. Okay? So changing, going through those stages of change and why that's so important. If that kid was pre-contemplation, to get him to a point of quitting in 8 weeks, it's going to be pretty hard. We do focus on participant satisfaction and making a connection. And our language of quitting is completely changed, replaced with change your use. Because if you get kids in front of you and you say you need to quit or you're going to quit, a lot of times they immediately block you out. Either because they don't want to do that, or they think that's too hard, or it's kind of giving them anxiety about thinking about it. So all I'm asking you to do is change your use, not quit. Okay? Personal plans for success, which I will show you, which are our workbooks, which, are there workbooks in each of your packets? Okay, there should be a workbook in your packet as well. But all the pages from the workbook are also found in the curriculum. So either way, you have a workbook. But that is called the personal plan for success. So we'll go through that along with the curriculum when we go through lesson by lesson. And then all of our, we have a focus on goal setting and attainment, so we'll talk about that. We ask participants to set a mini goal every single session. And sometimes those goals do not directly align with what, even with cessation at all. Sometimes their goal is don't curse my teacher out this week, and we can process about how that goes with some of the nicotine goals that they're working towards. And then all of our facilitators are trained. So technically at the end of today, you guys will be trained facilitators as well to utilize this curriculum however you see fit. So our goals of the program to help participants change their use, to identify barriers to quitting and remaining nicotine-free, to really help bolster their self-esteem and their ability to complete goals or attain goals, okay? Encourage evaluation of current behavior, introduce decisional balancing process, identify, promote more positive, healthy choices, assist in identifying and utilizing support systems, identify, assist in problem solving, identify and promote resiliency factors. So all the things we as SAP team members do all the time. Okay, so we're going to start off with a fun activity, and I'm trying to think how we're going to do this. What I'm thinking is if you, maybe 3 want to work together, so if you just want to turn around, maybe you 4. I need you in groups of 3 or 4. So however you want to do that without having to move across the room would work. So maybe if you 3 or do it by row, however you want to do. But I am going to, at some point, you don't need to do it now. You are going to have to stand and kind of move. So however that's comfortable, that's fine.
Come up here too and use these empty tables. It should be helpful.
Yeah, so if you guys just break into however you want to do your group, here, I can pass out if you want to explain.
I'm glad you're acquainting yourself with your group members. That may prove to be very useful in the next couple of minutes. Mallory is handing out 6 styrofoam cups to each of you. She's also going to give you a string, a rubber band with 4 or 5 strings that are attached to it. What I'm going to ask you to do is to unstack your cups and leave them much like the table in the back, so that they are spread out and upside down. In just 1 minute, after all the groups have received their cups, you guys have your cups back there? I'm going to ask you to come up with a team name. Just kidding, we won't do that. Unless you want it? Okay. All right. All right, come up with a team name. You have 30 seconds, 29, 22, 15, 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's your name? Philly Special versus, what's your name? Super Cups. Very cute. Very original. Could stand for anything or first letter of everybody's name. All right, so you do not get points for creativity, and you actually need not do that as part of your exercise, but I was overwhelmed by the competitive spirit. This is a competition that is it is brewing here in the room, because teens love competition, and they especially like competing against each other, and they love to win. In this case, everybody will lose and win at the same time. What I'm asking you to do is to build a pyramid out of the cups so that there are 3 on the bottom, 2 on the second layer, 1 on the top. It will look a lot like this.
Luckily, you guys don't need the visuals that the students need, but you never know. You never know. It's not easy.
So Mallory was able to put them together with a little bit of difficulty with just simply using her hands. I am going to tell you, you may not touch the cups. This is where you guys get wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, and start paying attention. I'm going to tell you that instead you need to take the rubber band, take the strings, pull it apart, and attach it to the top of one of the cups. And begin to construct your pyramid that way. You are not to start now, but rather to become familiar with the process.
You might, if you're in a row together, it might help if someone comes on the other side.
Now I see she is bringing a chair around, which she means business. You guys are rearranging, that's going to be useful. So again, this is going to fall into a competitive competition. I'm going to ask you to stack those cups into the form of a pyramid. You may not, regardless of what happens, touch the cup with your hands, or bad things will happen. Snakes will come out of the ceiling, or something bad will happen. Please follow along. Each person should hold on to one of the strings attached to the rubber band and use that device to move everything around. Do you guys have any questions? You should not have your rubber band attached to anything.
Why would we do that?
All right, we're all on a level playing ground. This is a point at which the students will begin to throw each other under the bus. So time begins in 3, 2, 1, start.
You were self-aware, though. I heard the self-aware thing.
We have a second layer. Second tier over here. A lot of communication. People are talking. I'm glad no one has quit. We have winners in the Super Phillies. Continue working. Continue for second place. There's nothing wrong Penguins.
Stress sticks, puzzle pieces. You want another stick or a puzzle piece?
Puzzle piece.
They fit in your hands as a stress ball. They're pretty cool. There's a little bit of shaking going on in the super cups, but they pulled it together. And JBR, those cups are just not cooperating today, but you persevere, and I appreciate that. Don't. They have finished before you, but that doesn't mean that you can quit. Everybody in their own. Oh my! Can't even watch this. Yes.
We'll go through, I'll show you where they are.
How many of you think you can do this by yourself? Take the strand, repeat the exercise, doing it all by yourself. You guys all say no because you're wise. The students, however, there's always 2 or 3 of them. I can do it. To which, while I'm talking, I encourage him. It's always a him, sorry guys. To follow through and prove me wrong. And it usually, eventually, he isn't able to do it, and he'll pass it off to his buddy. I like this activity because it encourages people and it gives them the opportunity to see that they need to work together with others in order to accomplish their goal. I've given them their goal in this case, or given you your goal to stack these cups. And how they work together, I'm more interested in their process. I will write down little tidbits that I hear from people, and I will read them and take them out of context. Because the activities that they, or the words that they use to support one another, oh, that's good, good job. You can use that with the quitting technique, or changing your nicotine use behaviors. Those are the supportive statements we need. Of course, there are always groups where they don't mesh well together, that those 2 students should never have been in the same room together, and maybe they don't have a supportive nature in between those 2. We also highlight that because that's examples of what we should not be saying to others in supportive context. Was it frustrating for anybody? JBR? Why? What? So usually the students some of them give up, which is really sad to see. We encourage them obviously to follow through, and it's okay. And I allow them to continue working on this project through the rest of the session until we get to something else they have to do. But while I'm at least talking, they can continue to work because they will get that gratification of accomplishment. Now, when the cup fell over, because I saw you had like 3 and you were ready to put the next level on, I heard, oh, but you picked yourself up and you tried again and you kept going. Did any of you guys had a setback here, even though you're Philly superstars? How'd you deal with your setback? The world did not collapse. You were able to persevere and pick yourself up. And I think the students we need to externally identify how resilient they are. Some of the students that I'm working with, it's amazing that some of them even tie their shoes in the morning, but some of them, it's amazing that they get to school every day. So we need to give them those kudos at every step along the way, and that's part of our job as the facilitator, is to recognize that and externally validate their process, because this is a process, it's not all outcome focused. So often in the school environment, they're all about what's my grade, how did I do, and here I'm more concerned with how do they get to where they're going to be next, and really focusing on the goal setting, and it's okay to fail or not achieve those goals. Do you think your group communicated well? No one swore.
This is my favorite group back here. You're in charge. And then she started talking. She's like, oh, no, you're in charge. I shouldn't be talking.
So we learn a lot about group
I put
dynamics.
that away from you. I was devoted within 10 seconds.
So you see a lot about group dynamic, and it's the quiet person who says the least that they listen to the most. Sometimes people self-identify themselves as leaders. And sometimes they really are, and sometimes there's the person who gives the wrong instructions but does so, especially at the middle school level, very loudly. It's a very loud activity, so you may want to let your school resource officer know that it's all okay, so they don't go into lockdown. So it helps to identify those leaders and to validate that you don't have to be loud and scream at people to communicate, because sometimes that's their mode of communication. And lastly, do you see, we asked them if they can see where this would transcend into nicotine use behaviors, and there's usually one person in the group that you can count on to be able to articulate what you're supposed to say. Did your team do any of the planning before they started the activity? I tell them that 90% of accomplishing a task is in the homework. And they groan and they moan. I said, not really, just the thinking about how am I going to actually do it so that I don't have to work as hard. I can work smarter, not harder. And if they pause a second and think about what they're doing, this is not something they're developmentally ready for, because often they act first, then they think about it. Sometimes they make a different decision. Sometimes they don't even know why they made that decision. A lot of this curriculum focuses on, or a lot of the early sessions focus on, why did you even go from not using to using? I don't know. It was just there. Thinking back, it really wasn't a good choice, but I just kept doing it. And why do you continue to use? And they've never thought about that. So it really gives them an opportunity to think about things that they wouldn't normally be presented with. And lastly, how would planning impact your solving this problem? If I gave it to you to do again, could you do it more efficiently? Could you do it to completion? Would you do it differently? You may not throw members out of the group. So when we're looking at this, some groups, I will say this works very well as an activity. In some groups, depending on the dynamics, and you will at this point begin to identify whether this is a group that works well together or one that does not. And if you're working in the school, you know which kids should be together in a group and which ones should not work well together in a group. But it really comes to a front here in this particular activity. Do you have any questions? And now back to mine.
I don't know. Where are you? Oh, no. All right. I don't know what I'm doing here. All right. So in terms of kind of what you need to start the program, we look at what's called a startup kit. And you actually have this in your curriculum. But I'm going to be really confusing on how to get to it because it's actually in the back. And my curriculum has seen better days. It's all the way in the back. Got it. So if you actually flip from the back, it's going to be easier because that's the beginning of the end of the startup kit. Okay, but the end of the startup kit, it actually looks like this. And in reality, I'm not going to go through each of it with you, but it actually, and I always say this with Project Connect, is don't recreate the wheel, because if it's anything you would possibly need to run a group in your school or agency, it's already been created and it's already in this curriculum. And if you want it as an electronic version, you can just email me and I will send it to you. Okay? I have each page as an individual PDF as well. So if you want that quickly, you can email it to me. So our startup kit basically gives us an overview. So this is things we would use with schools to gain support for the program. So we give an overview of Project Connect. We go over some FAQs, There is a sample permission slip in there. Again, I can email that to you if you wanted it in an electronic version. You will note on the permission slip, one thing that makes it different is that it does not say anything about nicotine use, because some students will not take that home and get that signed. And pending your school policy, it might need to say that, it might not. That is up to you and your school's solicitor. What I always tell schools is even if we come in to run the group for you, it is your school policy on what permission is for that student to be in the group. You own the liability when you bring an outside person in to run a group in your school. Okay, so whatever that permission would need to be. There are sample program announcements. There are little posters that you could print and laminate. There's sign-up sheets. There's faculty memos. There's participant invitations. Literally everything you could think of, we've already done and put in there for you. Okay, so that's kind of what the startup kit is. But the big question everyone always asks me is, this is great. Program seems great, seems like something we want to do, but how do we get kids there? How do we obtain participants to be in our group? Now, chances are you guys are sitting there hearing this information and you're kind of already have probably like 5 or 6 kids circling in your head that you're like, yep, they could benefit from this, okay? But how we get students to our group is self-referral. Kids will refer themselves to group. Sometimes we'll do a tabling event in the cafeteria, and you can see some things. Pamela brought some of her stuff she uses for tabling events over there. Sometimes it's just attention drawers to get them to come talk to us, and they can refer themselves to the group. Staff referrals, that's why there's faculty memos too, to send out to staff. Sometimes they have concerns. I will say that our number one referral is usually SAP teams, because you guys already know that information. If you are getting a behavioral health or a drug and alcohol assessment on that student, and you could tell them that you had a nicotine cessation group in your school, your assessor would be able to make a recommendation, maybe a secondary, could be primary, but usually a secondary recommendation, for a psychoeducational support group on cessation. Okay, if they know that they have that option, they can recommend that as well. Administrative referral, we talked earlier about some schools using it as a mandatory disciplinary violation. So we do have schools that it's written in their policy that students have to complete a group if they violate school nicotine policy. Sometimes it's just disciplinary referrals. Sometimes we get students with marijuana disciplinary referrals, and they come to us because they know they're co-using. And a lot of times kids will be more honest when they're with us in group than they were potentially when they're sitting in the principal's office getting in trouble. Referrals from law enforcement and court officials, referrals from social workers, guidance counselors, coaches. I've had a school where they wanted us, I did Project Connect with their entire baseball team because the coach felt it was necessary. Okay. Peer referrals, they always rat each other out. So if one signs up for themselves, they'll rat out their entire group that they use with, and they'll sign them all up. And the other way is parent referral. So sending out an information to your parent group saying, hey, we have this resource here in the school building, if you would like to refer your student. And vaping is a big one with parents, because sometimes even though they're purchasing it for them, they really don't want their kids to be doing it. So sometimes they will refer their students to a Project Connect group. That one's a little bit harder for us to keep the kids there, but I will tell you that as you'll see as we go through the curriculum with the games and stuff, they usually stay, okay? Understanding your target population is huge. So we know when we have to bribe, but you guys know your students. You would know how to get there. It's either parents, student, faculty, SAP team. You probably can figure out better than we could as an outsider coming in who is like the target population. Again, you guys probably already have names going through your head of who you could put in. We emphasize the word of change, not quit with these students. It keeps them engaged, because if you use the word quit, a lot of times they feel failure is imminent, so they don't want any part in it. So if you ask them to change, not quit, a lot of times they're way more likely to engage. Many youth expect quit to use without assistance. They never thought about getting help, so telling them that there is help. Utilizing existing social networks, okay, potentially, and considering small incentives. So you can see our swag here. And I will tell you at the end, I'll summarize this again, but if you choose to run the curriculum to Fidelity, there are pre and post tests, which I'll go over. If you do the program to Fidelity and you would like to get the research, you can utilize our pre and our post test. We will collect that research from you. You could mail it to us or scan it and send it to us. And sometimes we can bribe you with sending you some swag then to run the program again. So some of the other things you can do, sign up tables, sometimes at like health fairs, things like that is helpful. Classroom presentations. So we do offer, for counties that we are in, we do offer a prevention program as well that is a classroom presentation. So a lot of schools will ask us to do a classroom presentation, and then we can gauge student interest based on the classroom presentation. So that is an option. But you could always do your own classroom presentations in terms of saying, hey, we have this option. Did you know? And a lot of times then giving them a confidential sign up, like you can go to the nurse's office, or sometimes we'll pass out little index cards and ask them to say yes or no. Working with the school nurse is a big one. The school nurse usually knows, and you guys know this if they sit on your staff team, they usually know information we don't know in terms of things like this, so they're a good reference point. Having confidential sign-ups, PA announcements. One of the biggest things we do is offering that no strings attached first meeting. So I usually say to my students, if you don't, just come to the first session. If you don't like it, you never have to come back. I've never had a student not come back. They almost always come back, okay? Whether it's the bribes or whether it's the games or whether they're realizing it's not as scary as they thought it would be and I'm not there to yell at them, they're usually more likely to come back. Encouraging participants to bring a friend. Sometimes when we end one group, our last session, we'll say, hey, bring a friend to our last session, and then that friend will then go through the program next time, so they have a larger support network with them. Flyers, announcements, and then again, we can do mandatory attendance for policy violators as well, and administration usually likes that route as well. We do try to screen participants, so we would ask you to do the same to make sure that they're right for the program. Sometimes people hear cessation program and they would love it to be a prevention program, but it's not. So if students aren't using, but their parents use, they're probably not the right fit for group. A lot of times what I say to the schools, I'll still let them go through, because if you feel like they need the information, then I'm okay with it. But in terms of them being the right fit for the group, and they're not potentially at the same point of use as other people in the group, it might not be the best fit, okay? So sometimes we'll screen participants just to make sure that they're a right fit for the group. Holding an introductory session again, open registration where they can kind of sign up on their own. And we'll talk about to fidelity, like how many sessions they need to be at for it to consider them to have completed the group at what we look at in terms of our research.
So if you have a kid that comes in and they're not right for the group, what are some examples of things that you say to them to let them know that they're not right for the group? Because some kids can take that as a negative thing.
Yes.
Feel left out.
Yeah. A lot of times what I do is try to screen before they come to the group. So like before I even start the group, I'll ask to meet individually with students that the school might have identified and kind of just ask them potentially about use. And before I put them into the group. So that's how I would recommend, screen before that first session. So even then when I'm screening, a lot of them are like, I don't want to come, this is dumb. And I'm like, then come to our first group. If you don't like it, you don't have to come back. So that's why I recommend the screening. A lot of times if you guys are doing it in-house though, internally, so like you might not be, but if you're doing it in a school, you know whether the kids are relevant or not. But sometimes we might not if we're coming in as an outsider and a school hands us a list of 25 names and I'm like, I don't know I don't know any of these kids. So a lot of times I meet one-on-one. And then what I would say to the school is, hey, I would recommend some sort of prevention because it seems like, do you know what I mean? We have a lot of this. Now we can offer prevention in our region, but if it wasn't my region, I would find local agencies that can because there's a lot more availability for prevention than there is for cessation. Okay. One thing we don't touch on is nicotine replacement. So I always give this caveat too. What we usually say is we don't give medical advice. We don't recommend nicotine replacement, but if a student asks us about it, we would tell them to talk to their parents and their healthcare provider. Okay, that's not something that's found within our curriculum at all. So one thing again is that cessation is seen as a process, not an event. Okay, really important reframe there. Achieving sustained abstinence from nicotine may be difficult for some and really easy for others. You'll hear stories of people that say, oh, one day I just woke up and I decided to quit and that was it. And then you have some people that it's taken 10, 15 years to get to the point where they're able to really give it up. And there's unique challenges faced by young nicotine users. A lot of times parents don't necessarily know how much they're using. So a lot of times there's that secretive piece that comes in too. And then you have to change how you define success. One thing I found in working with adolescents is it really is how you frame that for them. I don't know how many kids I have in group that say like, well, my goal was to get down to 5 cigarettes and I'm at 8, so I totally failed. Instead of reframing that, well, you got to 8, you were at 20. Like, that's huge. So we have a, kind of this culture around kind of focusing on the negative. And when we try to build those resiliency factors, it's very uncomfortable a lot of times for them. So trying to reframe that success definition for them. So in terms of group size, we give the range of between 5 and 12. Now again, Pamela said this a few times too. A lot of times you guys know who should and should not be together. And it might be a group of 4 and you're like, yep, that's good. It might be a group of 12. You're like, you know what, this is a really good group. They all work together. 12's good. Okay? I usually let it up to the school because I always say, you guys know the kids, I don't. So you guys tell me if this needs to be 3 groups of 4 or it needs to be 1 group of 12. Okay? It's just, the ideal number is usually 6 to 8, and that's research based in terms of groups. They say 6 to 8 is the ideal number to have a group dynamic but not kind of have the consequences that go with the group setting. Group size affects the amount of time you'll have. Obviously, the less students we have, the more material we get through. The more students, the longer it takes us to get through activities and things like that. And sometimes we do break participants into several groups that run at the same time. So we sometimes go to a school and run 3 groups back to back to back. And then sometimes when we have that ability, the school we will rotate the period, so you're not missing the same period every week too. But that way we might have a group of 6th graders, a group of 7th graders, a group of 8th graders, because that's when their related arts period is. So you could break them up as well. I was at doing programming with one of my staff was doing programming with AEDY students, and they had 9 of them in a group, and it was really overwhelming, but she had them for an hour, and we ended up just splitting it into 2 groups for a half hour each, and the dynamic was completely more just way better. We got through way more material. So why group instead of individual? Because a lot of nicotine cessation tends to be one-on-one counseling. Okay, so why are we going group? Because all members are working towards the same goals. We know adolescents, I always say they're like pack animals, right? They have to be together at all times or they feel uncomfortable. So a lot of times in that one-on-one setting, they get freaked out. Like I don't want to go meet with someone one-on-one, right? So this is a group, they're with their friends, they're with their peers, they feel more comfortable. There's subtle forms of positive peer pressure, like we said. We hear them kind of building each other up a little bit. They're more likely to respond to their peers than any of us sitting in this room. We know that. They high need for peer approval and acceptance. They hold each other to a higher standard a lot of times than adults do, or they hold themselves to. They're more responsive to the interactive group process as opposed to lecturing, which sometimes one-on-one can feel like for students. And there's less room for deception and secrecy. And this is my favorite part because they totally hold themselves accountable. So sometimes at the beginning of group, I'm like, okay, what was our use? Like you said you were, going to cut back last week. How did it go? And they might be like, oh, it was great. I only smoked 3 cigarettes. And someone will be like, that's not true. You were at a party on Friday, the same party as me. I saw you smoke a whole pack. Like they totally hold themselves to a higher standard. Like they'll call each other, they'll rat each other out. So they're more honest about what they're actually doing because they're scared everyone's going to tell on them. So number of sessions, the program is designed to be implemented in an 8-session format, which is typical for most support groups, consisting of 1 45 to 60-minute session per week for 8 weeks. Rarely do we get an hour. Usually I would say a normal period, which is like 40 to 45 minutes. If it's like a school that has block scheduling, I would recommend like half a block. Okay, so that's usually a pretty good time, but you can adapt it. I've run it with juvenile probation where we've done 5 sessions for an hour and a half because they were mandatory, so it was a little bit different. I've run schools where they've run 10 sessions for a half hour. But we recommend that no less than 6 hours. So however we get to that 6 hours, that's okay, but that's to fidelity, meaning our research shows us that we need 6 hours. We need participants to attend 5 sessions in order to consider them to have completed the group. So when we look at our research, we're only looking at the pre and the post test of students who have come to at least 5 sessions. Okay, so that's how we know it's to fidelity. If someone misses a session, there's a variety of ways you can help them make up work. I will tell you that I'm not going to give anyone homework because they're probably not going to come back to see me. But if you're facilitating in a school, you might be more able to. But I have had students like come 5 minutes early so I could like review with them what we did last week, so they're kind of on the same page with the other students. But I wouldn't give them a take-home assignment. You can, but they'd probably laugh in our face. The group is intended to work across diverse populations. So we've run group rural, suburban, urban. It's always the same group, you just use different language. It's designed as a mixed gender program. Some schools will have a female group versus a male group. It doesn't need to be, it can be whatever. It can be age ranges as well. Typically we do like a middle school group or a high school group, but we have had a junior, senior high school where they put them together. Some schools separate them. But again, it's kind of up to, you guys in the school kind of knowing the students and knowing what would work. So our fidelity, our grant allows 12 to 18. 12 to 18. Now, if you're taking this and not potentially running it completely to fidelity, I mean, you can run it with whoever you want, but our research and what we're looking at is grades 6 through 12. So normally that like...
My 6th grade is elementary.
So we would still run it. So we do have an elementary, yes.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, we do grades 6, so ages around 12 to 18.
Okay.
And to, 20 if they're still in high school. So it happens. But yeah, so we do have an elementary school where we do run it to 6th graders.
Does that screw up with fidelity again? Like if you have
They're still considered in 12th grade.
Okay.
So we consider it by grade.
Well, 6th graders that are 11 that are using?
Yeah, we still consider, yeah. So there is like on our surveys, you'll see there's like it says like 12 and younger. You could check that. I would say most of the kids that come to us are 12, but I just had a school that had a group of 6th graders violate a policy, but they're in their elementary school. But it's still okay because they're part of our thing, yeah. Yep. And every district's so different in terms of where they house, that 6th grade.
When I work with the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, 3 separate groups, the 6th graders take a lot more time. It takes to explain the material. It's 8th graders a little bit more, not necessarily engaged, but they're able to read and process the activities a lot more quickly. So you may have to add extra sessions just to get through the material. And just be aware of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. In terms of evaluation, enlist the help of evaluation experts. If you have a research department because you work for an agency or a county or something like that, there is a pre and post test in the curriculum that you could utilize. The one that's in there is kind of the generic one. We've adapted it since we've printed this. We adapt it every single year. This year we actually went to a completely electronic version, so we can actually, moving forward, once our sample sizes are large enough, be able to give individual research statistics back to an individual site once we have a large enough sample size. That doesn't breach any sort of confidentiality, but we don't put names on any of it. We do like a number, so one just so we can match pre to post test, so we know who the student is, but with no names. So Karen itself does do all of our overhead for the research. So a lot of times when I'm selling this program to administrators, they love to hear that it's research-based because it is completely research-based. It's run to fidelity with a pre and a post assessment for each student so that we have reliable data about the program and what it's going to do. Okay, and most programs that we know don't provide data. A lot of support groups are more preventative, so there's no objective data, whereas this is different for this program. But again, it's cessation, not prevention. So quality and consistency is often as important to composition and outcomes. We collect baseline information, and we continue to monitor. So if you wanted to run this to fidelity, you could use the pre and post in there and do it yourself. But if you wanted potentially us to have that research, we could give you the pre and the post test. So if you sent me an email, say, hey, I'm going to run this group and I would like to run it to complete fidelity, I would give you the pre and the post test, and then you would send them back to me, and then we could do it as research. But if you're running it on your own, there's no expectation that you're going to do a pre and a post test. Okay, so that's just kind of a little added bonus for us if you do it.
And then you can send back the results?
Potentially, again, from what I heard, that was what I would love to say, but they said, our research department says we need a large enough sample size, so it probably would be a couple years of data before we'd have enough of a larger sample size to give you concrete data. So the hope is, once we have large enough sample sizes from each, say, district, that we run the group, and we'd be able to do one of those like infographic flyers that say like, here's what the students are using, here's how many thought it was effective, those types of things. So I don't have a concrete answer for you because this is the first year we've gone to this kind of online database for our research department, but that's the information they gave me, that once they had a large enough sample size. I don't really know what that means. I'm not a statistics person or research, but that's what they told me. So that's the hope. That's the hope. And they did tell me that yes, eventually. So like in some of our inner city schools, we might run it for hundreds of kids a year, and that's enough for us to then give that data back. But if we only do one group in a school and say you only have 6 kids, you know what I mean, we really can't give data for that. You could do the data on yourself then it's 6 kids. All right, don't freeze on me. All right, so in terms of the personal plan for success, if you want to pull that personal plan for success out, that is the workbook that is found in your Karen folder, the Velcro folder. If you want to pull that out as well as your curriculum, because now we're actually going to work our way through the curriculum, so you can see where some of the things we talked about fall, so you can see what the curriculum itself looks like, and then we'll go through each session so you can kind of see. But if you pull the personal plan for success out, I can show you where, like what pages go with what lesson. Okay, so the whole beginning of the curriculum is basically the information we went over in the first half of today. So almost all the information on some of the products are in there. The research that a lot of times was quoted in here is all in here, okay? And all of the sources we got it from are also in here. We also have the stages of change in here, that little sheet that I gave you with the stages of changes in there. So I actually use that with the students a lot to make them aware of it so they can kind of see where they're at in terms of their use. So all of that information's in the front of the curriculum. And then each session has its own little tab here. And this is new. We just redid our curriculum, I think 2 years ago, in which it's a binder. So it's no fun traveling with them, but you guys can take each page out now and make copies where we didn't have that access before. Or put your own things in here if you want. So if we look at lesson 1, we'll look at lesson 1 together. And you'll see how it's set up. So some of you are teachers, some of you are not, but this is a phenomenal curriculum. If you've ever looked at a curriculum, everything you could ever need or be asked of is in here. So every objective to every session, how long you would need, every resource you would need, every place we got any information we're giving to a student on any trivia question is in here. So if anyone ever questions you, it's all in here. And I always say it's almost like a PSSA, like it gives you quotes to say, like, welcome to day 1 of Project Connect. So you could literally do it if you had no idea what you were talking about. So I don't recommend just reading it, but you could if you really wanted to. But it tells you all the materials you would need as well. As you flip through the session, you'll see that there's some blue boxes. Okay, a blue box is an activity. Okay, some of the blue boxes are alternate activities, and you'll also notice that no matter how long your session is, you probably won't get through all of this material. So the nice piece about that is when you maybe have a kid that wants to go through it again, you can continue to alter it or use different activities or use different resources so that it's not the same all the time, which is really nice. Okay, so you can switch up. Or you might do an activity and be like, that's not going to work with this group, so let me try that alternate. Okay? So in session 1, it's really what we say about making the connection. We're trying to get the students to connect to each other, but also connect to their use. Okay? Talk about what they're using. So there is an attendance sheet, and if you see, every single resource and page is actually going to be at the end of each lesson. So everything that says there's a handout is in there for you to take out and make a copy of. Okay? So it'll say like resource 112, that will be in the back of that lesson. Okay? So it's the lesson plan and then all of the handouts and resources afterwards. Okay? This is the session that will go over group expectations, and you can have them sign a group expectation form, just like sometimes we do at the beginning of the school year, where we go over, what should the expectations of the group be. We talk about confidentiality, and usually what's said in group stays in group. However, we are mandated reporters, so if you disclose something I would need self-harm or others, then I would need to disclose it, and here's how I would go about doing that. So always maybe cover your bases there. And then there's some activities that kind of get students warmed up, okay? So I'm going to ask you all to leave everything but stand up for me. And I'm going to ask you to make some groups, okay? So I want you to get into groups of 3. Oh. And 1 group of 4. All right, how about get into groups of people that have the same eye color as you? What do we have? What's back here? Blue. Brown. What are you guys?
We're green.
Green. I think it's the largest group of green-eyed bunch I've ever had. Interesting. All right, get into a group where everyone was born in the same month.
July.
January, October.
No one wants to be in a group with you today, Pamela. Lone April. I'm April, so we're together. All right. How about group into people who all wear the same shoe size? Ooh.
11.
You like. Depends on the brand. All right, 8.5, very specific. All right. All right, the other ones, and I will tell you them. I'm not going to ask you to self-disclose potentially, but then we get into a group of people who started using nicotine at the same age you did. Get into a group of people who use the same product that you do. Get into a group of people who use the same type of nicotine as you do. And then get into a group of people who are thinking about quitting at the same time you are. Okay? So it's just a way of us to help make connections, not only personally, but then around their use as well. All right, thank you. You can sit down. So that's one activity. It's actually called making the connection or finding a connection, I think. You're making a connection, finding connections. It's actually the name of it. All right, but that's in one of those blue boxes, so you can see. And then the nice thing about this is actually, and all the activities Pamela has done, she has run through the facilitation questions, so you could hear kind of what they look like in terms of what her responses might be. But every activity, there's also processing questions that go with it. Okay, so underneath each activity, you will see the processing questions that you can take, and that would connect it to the lesson and the objectives at hand, which is really nice. So you're not on your own to do that as well. In the first session is also where we find our pre-assessment survey. So it is in the curriculum here. I will tell you that typically when I do group, I do the pre-assessment survey my second group with students because I really like the whole first session to be about making connections before I ask them to disclose a lot about their use. However, if you already know the students, you might be able to give it that first session. I kind of gauge my groups, but typically I want them to get to know me before I'm like, here's a 2-page document that I would like you to fill out about your use, but I swear it's confidential. Okay, it is boring, but I will tell you, it only takes about 7 minutes. Although it's pretty in-depth, it's a front and the back. It's quite an in-depth survey, but it's all about them, so it goes pretty quickly. But it takes about 7 to 10 minutes to do it, and I almost always go through it. And this will be my plug to you to do it with them, because a lot of times they don't understand or they don't know what some of the products are. Like they might check, I don't know how many kids I get that check like, no, 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 no. And then the next week they're like, oh, I smoked so much hookah last week. And I'm like, it said you didn't smoke any hookah on your sheet. And they were like, oh, is that what that was? I just put no. I'm like, yes, that's what that is. So going through it with them is important as well, especially if you get students that come into group because they're using blunts. All right. A lot of times they're like, well, I'm not a cigar smoker. I'm like, but you're using a cigar wrap. So every time a place it says nicotine, it says cigar, you are using a cigar. So reframing that for them as well is super important. Okay. But that's really all session 1 is. There is a closing activity called Nicotine Myth or Fact. We're not going to play it, but it's in there, and everything you would need to do it is in there. I've just taken the cards and laminated them, but you could do it however you want. But basically, you read a trivia question, and they have to guess whether it's a myth or a fact. If they get it right, they get a little card that in the background has like an M, an A, all the letters that spell out myth or fact, and the first group to spell out myth or fact would get a prize. So it's a nice way to close that first session with them in terms of kind of just going over some nicotine use scenarios. And then again, if they question you on any of them, all the research and all the journal entries and all the studies that where they came from are in there as well. And then we also start off with our goal setting. So if you look at your personal plan for success, which is your workbook, for your session 1, really what you're looking at is page 1, which really kills them because page 1 is not the first page. So it's actually like the 3rd page, but it's in longer 1. All right, but this is what I ask them to do usually before the end of the first session, is I want them to come with an ultimate goal for them while they're in this group. And that might not be quitting smoking. It might not be stop juuling. It might not be any of those things. Sometimes that goal, they might say, I don't have a goal, I don't really want to be here. In which case I'll say, well, what do you want to get out of this? Do you just want to learn more? And a lot of times they'll be like, well, yeah, I would like to learn more, but I'm not stopping. That's fine. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking you to educate yourself. So let's write that your goal is to learn more. That's fine. Okay? And then I want to ask them, why do you want to do that, though? Give me 3 reasons why you want to achieve that goal. Okay, really push them a little bit on that. Because sometimes then they'll change their goal, or sometimes they'll give some really insightful answers around why they actually want to learn more. You know, I don't want to keep smoking like my parents, or I don't want to do this, or I've already seen it affect my athletic ability or things like that. And then if you see down at the bottom here, there's little tiny goals, and there's 8 of them. Those are our mini goals. We ask them at the end of every session to come up with 1 mini goal that's in line with their overall goal, but they can accomplish in a week or until the next time I see them. So this is where sometimes I get I'm not going to throw a chair at my teacher this week. Great. Perfect. Let's keep that as a goal. All right. But let's talk about how that aligns with better decision making and moving us along the stages of change. Sometimes their first goal is really just to think about what they're using. I have that be someone's goal a lot. Because a lot of times, like Pamela said, they don't think about it. And they've never thought about why they keep using. So let's think about that. I just want you to think about why you're using. Or think about when you do use. What's that feeling like? That's what I want your goal to be. It doesn't need to be, I'm going to cut down from 5, to 4 cigarettes. It doesn't need to be that. Sometimes it's just the little goals that's in line with their big goal. So at the end of every session, we ask them to come up with a mini goal. And the beginning of the next session, we always try to go back and ask them about that goal. How did it go? Right? And I always jot myself little notes so I can remember what everyone's goal was, so that they feel really like it's that personal investment in like, wow, they really cared about that was my goal. How did it go? If you remember that, that's really important to students. So that's kind of session 1. Yeah.
So you give these out to every student?
Correct. So we give them out to each student. All the pages are also in the curriculum, so you can make copies if you just wanted to do like a goal page or something like that for students. One of the things we can give you, if you give us a pre and a post, we will send you more workbooks. So like if you say you run a group, or you can even email me and say, hey, I'm going to run a group for 8 kids. Can I have some workbooks? I will do it. I'll send you pre and post and workbooks for those students. And then if you email me, the post test, I'll send you more workbooks to do your next group.
Just what's in here.
Correct. Yeah. You can just use what's in there. Yep. Any questions on session 1? All right, session 2. So if you flip to page session 2 tab, is the health connection. And this is really the only spot that we talk about health effects of nicotine use. But one thing I will tell you is that we don't really talk about the negatives. We talk about the positives of quitting or not doing it. We don't tell them the negatives of doing it, partly because they already know those, right? They might not know them necessarily about vaping, but they know what they're doing is usually not a good choice, okay? So we don't need to educate them on that. We want to tell them the positives of not doing it, and that's a reframe that kind of shocks them sometimes. You're not going to tell me how bad it is? Well, no, I'm not, but I'm going to tell you if you don't do it, here's how good your heart would be. Right? The start of the warm-up activity for this is the hold your breath activity with the straw and the coffee stir. So that is how we engage students in talking about health and the positives of not doing it, and how much better it feels to breathe through a larger diameter straw than it does in a smaller one. So that's the warm-up to ease into that, to really get them invested in the health piece. We ask them to do what's the risk, which is an activity where I ask them, I do it a couple different ways, but you're kind of asking them on the fly to come up with consequences of use. And I do this a lot with my prevention programming, and when I ask them consequences of use, I'm specific that it doesn't need to be health related. I want you to think about consequences of any nicotine use that might be just consequences in general. And sometimes kids come up with some really good things that may surprise you. I just did this last week with an inner city school, and one girl raised her hand, she was like, fires. She was like, a lot of fires start because of cigarettes. And my husband's actually a lieutenant in a fire department, and that absolutely is true. A lot of people fall asleep with cigarettes and their house catches on fire because of couch or a mattress. And that's one that a student had never brought up before, but it really started to get them thinking outside the box of some of the consequences, as opposed to the ones they already know. Like you could die or you could get cancer. Right? They know those things. So starting to push them a little bit. And you might want to be specific. What are the consequences of vaping? Right? What are the consequences of cigar use? What are the consequences of cigarettes? What are the consequences of chewing tobacco or hookah? Right? To see what they know, too. Right? So that's the what's your risk, where you can kind of put them into teams and ask them as a team to come up with as many consequences as they can, and the winning team gets a prize. We like competitiveness in this curriculum, as you can see, because teens align with that. They like that. They like when there's a prize, even if it's as simple as a sugar-free mint or lollipop or a stress ball. And everything that we give out to our students, all of our swag, is somehow related to a positive coping skill. So we don't bring in like any other candy. All the candy would be a quitting or a cessation tool, as well as a stress management tool. So that's another piece of it. We also have like water bottles we give them sometimes as well. We'll ask them what their reasons for using, which is actually in session 2. The next page in your personal plan for success is this little survey, and they love surveys. And I actually really enjoy this survey because it asks them to kind of think about why they're using it. And then it kind of categorizes it into, are you using because of addiction? Are you using because you like it? Are you using as a stimulant? Do you like just having something in your hand? Because once they know the answer to that, they are more likely to be able to figure out what might help them to curb that. Right? So if it's about something in your hand, then I might be able to give them some sort of fidget, right? If it's something that it's a habit, that's going to be a little different. We're going to attack that a little bit different. If it's that they're a social user, then when we talk about support network, that's going to be really important. Well, who you're using with, are they in this group? And if they're not, maybe they should be, so that you guys can be a support network to each other, because it sounds like you only really use around these 3 people. So let's get them in the group too, so that you can all do this together, so you don't feel as much pressure when you're around them, okay? Session 2 also, personal plan for success, is page 4 and 5. The nice thing about page 4 is all the positives of stopping, and I have so many kids that want copies of this to take it home as well, to the benefits of like their grandparents or parents who maybe are users. But it starts within 20 minutes, your blood pressure and heart rate go back to normal. Okay? And sometimes you can go through these as well and help them understand where they're seeing withdrawal symptoms within themselves too. So one of the ones I always tell them that within 8 hours, your carbon monoxide and oxygen levels go back to normal. And that's why that first cigarette or first hookah hit or first vape hit in the morning gets you lightheaded, whereas the one an hour later does not. Because your actual oxygen levels went back to normal when you were sleeping. Right? So you withdrew while you were sleeping, and everything went back to normal, so that you were actually building your tolerance up every single day when you're adding that to your system. Okay? And that's why they love the hit of the vape or something after school, right? Because they're getting that little rush that they don't get if they're doing it all night or all weekend, because their oxygen levels went back down. And then on page 5 is the financial piece. So a lot of times if I'm not using the workbook, I may just make a copy of this. They love this activity. So the average cost in the United States right now, this is the entire United States, is $5.51, but this was 3 years ago. So it's gone up, okay? But what you ask them to do is kind of come up with how much they're spending. So, and this is usually like rocket science for a lot of them, because a lot of them be like, well, I don't buy it, I get other people's or whatever. I'm like, okay, if you did, how much would it cost? So a Juul starter kit is $49.99. Okay, and how many pods do you use a week? Well, I only use 2 pods a week. Great, so each pod might be $10. So it's $20 a week, so we'll divide that by 7 and we'll say this is how much you use every day. Okay, and then we'll go through all of these costs. So in 1 month, how much do you spend? And then I ask them, what could you buy instead? Inevitably, they say food, always. Food, McDonald's, whatever. Okay, and in 5 years, how much would you spend? It's usually like, sometimes like $5,000, and they're like, I'd buy a car. I'm like, okay, great. They think it's like a Beamer. I'm like, all right, maybe not, but we're on a start. Yeah, down payment on a car, right? And then 10 years, a lot of times it's like $30,000, you know, when by the time we get to 50 years, $30,000, $40,000. And inevitably they tell me they're going to buy a mansion. I'm like, well, we also need to talk about finances, because that's probably not true. But you could, like, you don't realize how much money they're potentially spending. And a lot of times they'll argue and say, well, it's not my money. Like, okay, but you're getting that money from somewhere, right? What could you do with it instead? You know, there's a lot of things. It's kind of like one of those things where they tell you to quit smoking. They tell you to take the money and like put it in a jar. Or even if you quit coffee, like I'm not going to go to Dunkin' every morning. I'm going to put that $5 I spend in a jar. You don't realize how much you're spending unless you separate it out. Because a lot of times you don't even notice you have an extra couple $100 in your wallet by the end of the month unless you specifically put it aside. So having them like specifically think about it, a lot of times this is something kids don't think about because they haven't thought about their use accumulating any cost yet. They can see their parents, but they can't see themselves and how much it's costing them. And even our kids with marijuana, we have them break this down, right? So how much do you spend on weed a week? Okay, so $20, divide that by 7. Right.
It's only 99 cents.
It's $1 a day. Yep. Yeah, correct. So we talk about all of that stuff and break it down financially to make it feasible, like concrete for them. Because they really haven't made that connection before. Okay? There's also an activity in here called truth or consequence. It's very similar to the myth and fact in the first section, but it's basically a trivia question, and if they get it right, they get a truth card, and the truth card is a positive to not using nicotine. If they get it wrong, they get a consequence, which is a negative about using nicotine. So the team with the most truth cards gets a prize. So that kind of culminates that lesson. There is a spot in here for a program movie. We used to have a DVD we've used. We've searched high and wide for like a really good informational DVD that's not just kind of a scared straight method. We have not found anything that we fully vetted yet. So we do put that in here because that's where we would put it in the section. But again, we haven't found one, but you could put one in that your school or your local agency has vetted, but we haven't found one that we feel strongly enough yet that we vetted. So that is session, and then again, you end with your goal, setting a goal for the next week. So that is session 2. Any questions on session 2? Okay. Session 3. Session 3 is the addiction connection. And this is where we introduce participants to the cycle of addiction. We create an awareness of the progression of dependency and where they are on that continuum. We introduce them to decisional balancing, and we start to talk about where they are in terms of readiness to change. Okay? So in this session, we talk about the continuum of dependency. So let me see this. Did I put this in here? I don't think I did. The continuum of dependency in the curriculum is in here. It looks like this. It's page 3.8. It's in session 3. It's just one of the handouts. Looks like this. Okay, we go through the decision. So when we went through that little cycle, where we talked about use, and then you build tolerance, and then you have withdrawal, so you use more. We go through that with the students as well. It's in the personal plan for success, but we do have an activity that goes along with it where we go through the 4 stages of addiction. So we look at the first stage being the learning stage, where you're learning what it feels like to have a substance in your body. And we tell students that that's really where you're at when you try things for the first time. Okay? No tolerance, no withdrawal. Stage 2 is that misuse stage, right? So you have a little bit of tolerance, a little bit of withdrawal. And how I share that with adults is this is where most adults fall with alcohol. Okay? You've had it before, so you're not in the learning stage, but you probably have some tolerance. You probably need more than a couple sips of a drink to get drunk, and you probably have some withdrawal, whether you like to admit it or not, meaning the next day you don't feel so great if you drink too much. A hangover is actually your body's way of telling you that you're withdrawing from alcohol. Okay? You drank too much, don't do it again. All right? So that's where most people fall. It's kind of when you go to the doctor and they ask you if you drink, and you're like, well, socially. Okay? That is the social user. That second stage, okay? A lot of students like to self-identify as being in the social user stage until I tell them about stage 3, right? And stage 3 is the abuse stage, but that's where we start to use because sometimes we don't feel a certain way, so we use to make us feel a little bit better, okay? So if I'm using nicotine every time I'm angry or every time I'm anxious or every time I'm stressed, that's not just a social user, right? I'm using to change an emotion. I'm using to change how I'm feeling. That's an abuse stage. I'm abusing the substance now. And now I have even more withdrawal than I did before and an increased tolerance. And then that last stage is the addiction stage. This is where most people think about when they think of addiction. They don't realize that every time you add a substance to your body, you're actually in a stage of addiction with a substance, right? We just stereotype like addiction as being this is what it's like, even though if you add a substance into your body that's mind altering, you're working on a stage of a continuum of addiction as well. A lot of students won't self-identify as being in the addiction stage. They like to be in that social stage, but most of the time they're falling in that 3rd stage. And this is where I also reference to them the importance of understanding gateway drugs. And I always say gateway drugs because they groan and moan whenever I say that, and they're like, oh, everyone says that. I'm like, but hear me out here. If you go through these stages with nicotine, do you think you go through the stages with another drug quicker or slower? Well, quicker. Okay, so why do you think they call it a gateway drug? Because if you smoke nicotine product at average age 11.8, what do you think the chances are of using another substance and going through those stages with another substance? Pretty quick. Okay? Let's see. What else is in the addiction section? This is where we start really having them talk about like decision making and their readiness to change. So we do an activity called pros and cons, which I actually love this activity because I do it with a lot of any of my like drug and substance use related groups. So I have them do, and it's in here, it's a worksheet. I ask them the pros of the substance. Sometimes I use like, giant Post-its and I stick them around the room so they have to get up and move. But I'll say like, what are the positives? Because often they're only asked about the negatives. They're only told about the negatives. Well, they use for a reason, right? And you're engaged with them instantaneously if you don't block out those pros. Because they're used to that. They're used to adults saying, don't do this, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this. Well, they do it for a reason, whatever that reason is. So I want to hear them out. So tell me what the pros are. Why do you do it? What's so good about it? But then I want you to think about, what are your fears about it? What are the fears of using? What are the good things about quitting? And then what are your fears about quitting? And this is one of the biggest ones, and they usually really struggle with this one. What are your fears? Are you fear you're not going to have any friends? What are you going to do on a Friday night when everyone's sitting around smoking and you're not? Right? Those are the fears. Are you fear you're not going to be able to stop? Or that you're going to pick it up again? Right? So those types of things. Okay? That's one of my favorite activities, and it seems kind of mediocre when it's in here, but actually seeing it pan out, the students really enjoy that one because you can buy in. And a lot of times they're like, oh, miss, we're going to have so many pros. It's going to be awesome. Inevitably, they have less pros than all the cons that they know. It almost always weighs out that the cons outweigh the pros, and they're always like, oh, I never thought about it like that. Okay? I sometimes put the It's Your Loss activity in this section as well. You can kind of play with some of the activities. It's to fidelity in this order, but sometimes students come in with their own agenda. So the nice thing about a facilitator is if they come in and you're like, you know what, they're not ready for this lesson today, let's do another lesson. Or you know what, I really want to drive home the addiction piece. Sometimes I will throw the It's Your Loss activity in here. And I'll process that when it's your choice. It's kind of like a stage 1 or 2. You're making the choice of what consequence may come, versus stage 3 or 4 in terms of dependency is you're losing that choice. Me or someone else is coming across things off your paper. How does it feel differently when someone else makes the choice versus you? So again, you can kind of play with some of these activities too. And the nice thing about this curriculum is even if you never run this group ever, you have so many activities that you could infiltrate into classroom settings, into other groups, all in here, okay? So that's session 4, or session 3. Yeah?
I'm sorry that I keep asking.
No, please.
So on the stages of change, one stage that I didn't see on there was
Relapse?
yeah. and so I was kind of wondering about that because then like not talking about relapse.
Yes.
If someone's trying to quit, inevitably like relapse happens.
Yeah, so in Prochaska and Di Clemente's, yes, you're absolutely right.
They relapse and like, oh, I've totally failed. I'm done.
I'm never trying again.
Right.
Yes.
But it keeps cycling now.
Yes.
You're back to pre-contemplation and contemplation.
Yeah, so in Prochaska and Di Clemente's model, relapse is part of maintenance.
Okay.
So it falls within that in our curriculum because we've just taken theirs and put it in there. In newer models, you will see relapse as its own stage. Yes, so in ours, in here, embedded is relapse is embedded in maintenance. And we discussed that maintenance is, you know, it's an ebbing and flowing process, stages of change, right? Someday they might be really ready and the next day they come in and they're right back in pre-contemplation because they got so stressed or something happened that they're right back. So yes, thank you for that. That's a good point. We have it embedded in maintenance, but
Okay.
yeah.
I feel like how quickly they are to be like, oh, I'm done.
Always. Yeah, always. And that's why I think when they latch onto this group so much because we don't emphasize quit and it's change, that they do latch onto that because they start to feel like more positive about themselves, which is sometimes really nice to see because we a lot of times have kids sitting in front of us that don't make the best decisions, right? This is just one sometimes of poor decisions they make. And they have so much going on in their lives that sometimes quitting is not the most important thing. We just need to get them to school, or if we can bolster like one protective factor in being there and just maybe being there for 8 weeks consistently, then we've done our job. Yeah, but relapse, absolutely. We talk all the time about how it flows. You know, and I'll sometimes bring that. So they might come in and I'm like, how'd you do this week? Well, I was miserable. Now I smoked more. I'm like, okay, well, why? But you can then have that process of like, you know, what happened? And then you kind of backed up to pre-contemplation a little bit. So let's push again to try to get to contemplation. I have them discuss their stage of change too, because I think it helps that it's really important to be self-aware. We know that as adults, but it's really important as teenagers because we know that they're usually not very self-aware. So any hints we can have in that direction is good. But thank you for bringing that up. It's a really good point. All right, so session 4 is connecting with change, and this is actually the first time we're actually starting to talk about change with them, all right, which you'll notice. So we talk about our little goals, but we really don't delve into change until session 4 because we really want to make that connection with them. So this is where we start to talk about techniques in terms of quitting. Okay, so what works, what doesn't. And this is really the only section we actually talk about this. We really don't talk about this in any other section. We talk about the 5 Ds. Okay, which are delay, do something else, deep breathing, drink water, and discuss with friends or family. Okay, so we talk about what are some techniques they can use. If you look on page 8 of your personal plan for success, that's what goes. Page 8 and 9 are what goes with session 4. And what I like about these techniques is that I usually tell students is that these are, you know, you're picking and choosing. It's not like I pick one and that's the one that's going to work. You have to figure out what works for you, okay? A lot of times what I do with students is I ask them to like think about how many times they use, and that's why I like them to have this goal. Okay, this little tracker is in here. You can ask them to do a tracker that sometimes they can put in their pack of cigarettes or put with their Juul like in their pocket, and it asks them like, you know, when did you use? What time of day was it? How were you feeling? Did you feel like you needed it versus you just wanted it? Or sometimes I just manually have them work it out in their head. So I'll say, okay, how many times a day do you use your Juul? And they might say like, you know, 7, right? So maybe I do it in the morning when I wake up, then maybe like on my way to school, then maybe lunch, or, on my way to tech, I tell a lot of times because maybe they have an option to leave the school like during lunch, and then after school, and then before dinner, after dinner, before bed. Okay, great. All right. How many of those do you feel like you need? And they might be like, well, like right when I wake up, right after school, right before bed. Okay, that's 3. Okay, but you had 7. So could we take one of them out? Right? Could you use the Juul less on your way home from school? Right? So we starting to think about those decision making, about that change. Okay? Just having a conversation about it. I'm not going to be like, okay, pick one, that's what you're going to do. Okay? Because that's not effective. We're really just talking to them about it in hopes that we're planting the seed. All right? So that one day they can come back. All right? So what I'm going to do is have you do me a favor, close up your workbook for me. Okay? And I'm going to show you my little survival kit here. So we introduced the concept of a survival kit to them. And what a survival kit is it is a toolbox full of things you could use instead of a nicotine product. Now, some of these might work for you and some of them might not work for others, but I'm giving you an example of things you might put in your quote-unquote survival kit. So this is my little bag, and the pillowcase is not one you put in your survival kit, but it's where I put all of my items. All right? So, and I go through this with students. Here are things I might put in my survival kit. I might put a stress stick, right? A hand fidget. I might put a stress stick. I might put a little Jolly Rancher or a hard candy, something I could suck on, like a mint as well. I might put a deck of cards. Something to do, decrease boredom. So sometimes my trigger is boredom, so that's why I'd want to put these in here. Markers, so I could color, right? We know that there's a lot of research behind fine motor skills and coloring and stress relieving, so that could be something you might want to put in your survival kit if you tend to use because you're stressed. Another thing you could put in is Play-Doh, okay? Actually, Play-Doh's really good for tactile people who like to play with something. It's kind of like a hand fidget, but something that's a little more malleable. So Play-Doh. Lollipops. If you've ever had someone quit smoking, a lot of times they really like lollipops, okay? Lotion. Okay, again, people who are tactile, some of you might be people that like to put lotion on. That's a very tactile thing for people. It's very relieving of stress, okay? Same with painting your nails is actually research proven to be a stress relieving technique. I don't think so because I don't like to paint my own nails, but yeah, it can. A lot of people do like to paint their own nails, and I'll have kids say, well, that's great for quitting smoking because if you know when you paint your nails, you can't do anything afterwards for like 20 minutes. So good time management technique there. This has seen better days, but I have a coffee stir in here. Okay, so some people, that oral fixation, that tactile fixation, that coffee stir really helps. And that's something they might have access to. I don't condone stealing. I say, but next time you're at Dunkin' Donuts, get 2 instead of 1. A composition book. Some people really like journaling or writing. Okay, I actually a lot of times will tell my students the research that shows that if you write 5 things a day that you're grateful for, you tend to have a better mind frame in terms of building your protective factors against your risk factors. So sometimes I bring that up when I show them that. I also have a Slinky. They don't know what this is. They don't know these exist. But I'm like, this is a toy. And they're like, that's a toy? Who would play with that? But it is like something to play with, like kind of like a little fidget. I also have a Rubik's Cube, which to me is not stress relieving whatsoever, but some people think they are. So like some sort of little game or like a mind occupier. Have you ever like found yourself playing with one of those games that you have to spend like hours trying to figure out like what piece goes where or getting it apart? Sometimes that's good, sometimes not, all right? I also usually put in here a bracelet. So some people, like if you have a ring or a bracelet, something that you constantly play with. If I left a paper clip around some of you, it might have been all bent out of shape by the end of this training, and that's because your brain focused more when your hands were occupied. So sometimes having like a hair tie, a bracelet, some sort of piece of jewelry helps them. So I put a bracelet in my survival kit. I also put gum. my survival kit. Cinnamon gum is actually the best gum, they say, to quit using a nicotine product with. I think partly because it burns all your taste buds off so you don't taste anything. But I also think that it's supposed to be like brushing your teeth after orange juice. Like it's supposed to make everything taste really bad. Even if it's good flavored stuff, it doesn't taste the same after you chew cinnamon gum. Okay. The only other thing I put in here is a popper. You guys all remember these? That like pop up. Okay, so popper, some sort of little toy, hand fidget, hand occupier. So what I'm going to ask you to do is find somewhere to write, and I want you to write down as many things as you can remember that I just showed you. Winner gets a prize. If you don't know what it's called, just describe it. Pass these out then when they're done with this. I'll give you guys 1 minute. Twenty seconds. All right, stop. Count up how many you have. Circle it for me. No cheating. There were 15 items that I showed you. Did anyone get 15? 14? 13? 12? 2 12s? Did you write anything that maybe isn't actually up here? I'm not going to make you read all of them. You can get a stress stick or a puzzle piece. You can help yourself. That activity is called What Did You See? That is how we introduce the concept of survival kits to them. So kind of a fun way to have them engaged in it. Pamela is actually passing you around a survival kit that we actually give to each student. Within our group, you guys could do this if you wanted to. This is by no means anything, but this example is in here. So this is kind of what we give them. It has a little Project Connect, but we give them a popper, which sometimes I take out because some places you just can't give them that. A paper clip, a coffee stir, a lollipop, a bracelet, a hard candy, and then some information about, Project Connect as well. And sometimes then we'll process about what would be in your survival kit. So if they say, the coffee stir would be really great, let's process about, okay, so where do you normally use your product? Do you keep your pod in this, case in your backpack, your Juul? All right, let's put some coffee stirs in there too. So the next time you go to pull out your Juul, you have a choice, right? You could use the coffee stir and try that. We know a craving only lasts about 10 minutes. So if you can ride the wave of that craving, you at least might not use it that 10 minutes. And chew on your coffee stir instead, or eat your lollipop, or have your piece of gum. Okay? I've had kids have a pack of cigarettes where they'll put one piece of cinnamon gum in their pack, so when they open it, they're kind of like, I could do either. All right, sometimes they'll do lollipops. I've had kids put their survival kits in like their cup holder of their car and put their cigarettes like in the trunk, so that if they actually wanted to stop, or even their vape or anything like that, they'd actually have to pull over. I used to say backseat, not anymore, because I thought that through a little bit more. I was like, nope, in the trunk, so they'd have to physically get out of the car to go get it, instead of where they could reach for their survival kit and try something in there instead. So we process about kind of what that would look like. I'm not saying you need to bring a bag like with you when you go to your party on Friday, but you might want to have a pocket full of gum. Like bring a pack of gum with you, bring some lollipops, bring some things with you that maybe you won't use as much as you would have if you didn't have with you. So that's kind of the concept of session 4. Any questions on that? Session 5, and session 5 is my favorite session because it's where we talk about healthy choices and it's where we talk about stress. Okay, because a lot of them are using because they are stressed. So here's where we can try to reframe that a little bit for them and explain to them that there might be other choices they could make in terms of stress relieving techniques that don't have to be something that's a substance. Okay, so we're going to do this entire section in one activity. So I have actually, and I'm showing you this because this is how I feel it works really, really well. So there's a lot of different activities in here. I put them all in one, and it basically takes the whole session sometimes. So we're going to do that today. We're going to play a little game. So we're going to see how competitive you are, because I'm going to whip out some dice. And we're going to see how that goes with you guys. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is something called biofeedback. And biofeedback really is how your body reacts to stress, okay? So trying to be more mindful of your body. So we know that there is a huge push for mindfulness, and there's a reason behind that. And one of the things is being really mindful of what your body feels like when you're craving or needing a substance, and then being really mindful of what it feels like afterwards and when the withdrawal and the cravings happen as well. So we're going to do that through an activity called biofeedback with these little dots called biodots. They are by no means accurate, but they're really fun, and we all enjoy them. So they're basically mood ring stickers, all right? And they're going to change color based on your skin's temperature. So I do have some keys. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot, but I will pass one out to each table so you can kind of see what the keys look like, okay? So I usually have them either stick here or on the wrist. I usually say wrist only because if they want to keep it on, or you want to keep it on and you hopefully wash your hands, you might, if you put it up here, you could get away with it not falling off. So if you stick it on your wrist, it does work in here too. I usually tell them not to stick it on their face or anything like that, just stick it. Sometimes I put it on for them. These are not part of the curriculum, but they're called biodots. That's listed in there. If you Google it, you can find them online. They're pretty cheap. They come in like this packet of all these biodots, and you get some little keys with them too. I actually use them sometimes in my prevention program in elementary school. Teachers love them. They'll use them with their students to talk about relaxation techniques and things like that. And just being mindful of your body and the connection between your brain and your body and what that dot is telling us is really what biofeedback's about. So when you get that stuck, you might need to give it a couple minutes to change. Never goes on the face. Yeah, never on the face.
How come?
Because they will stick it on their face and make inappropriate cultural references.
Good point.
I didn't think that either until it happens every time, and you're like, nope, not appropriate. Is anyone's changing? What colors do we have? Blue? Good. Green? Green's good. Green's like neutral. Okay, here, do you want to pass some keys out? So the scale is kind of black, stressed, brown, tense, green, neutral, not feeling one way or the other, blue or violet, being very relaxed. Okay, so we're striving for like a blue or violet in our cool color scheme. I have never had a dot successfully change from black. So I'm like, either I'm soulless or I'm just always cold. I don't know. Is anyone tense already? You're tense already? Tense? Tense? I'm slightly tense. It's like I am right in the middle. Slightly green, slightly brown. What are you? Very tense. Is it black? No, sorry. Mine's always. Are you cold? When I'm cold, mine stays black. But I mean, these are so accurate. So I mean, it's so scientific, research based, to fidelity. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to forget about the dots for a minute, and we're going to play a really fun game. We're going to see how competitive you guys can get, okay? So this game, we'll see. This game is called Come on Six. I'm going to explain the rules to you, and then we'll break off into teams. We'll just do the same teams we did for the cups. It'll just be easier. You know who's on your team. Let me explain the rules, though. The point of the game is to write numbers 1 through 100. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 100. First person in your group to write that number 100 on their paper will win the game and a glorious prize. All right? Now, only one person can be writing at a time because there's only going to be one pen for your entire group. So only one person can be writing at a time. The only way to get the pen is to roll a 6. on the dice. So if it's my turn, I'm going to roll the dice. If I don't get a 6, I'm going to pass the dice to the person clockwise from me. They're going to roll. If they get a 6, they're going to pick up that pen and they're going to write as fast as they possibly can, because while they're writing, the rest of us continue to roll. The next person that gets a 6 can take the pen from the other person writing, and they can start writing. So the quicker you roll while someone else is writing, inevitably the less time they will have to write numbers. Okay? If you already started, as soon as someone takes the pen from you, you stop there, but the next time you get a 6, you can pick up where you left off. So if you left off at 34, the next time you get a 6, you do 35. You don't need to start over. Okay? So you will probably need to clear an area for yourselves. You will need a piece of paper, or I have little half sheets of paper. I can give them all a little half. And you need one pen. So I usually put one pen in the middle with the dice so no one feels like they're being cheated and the pen's closer to someone else. One paper, one pen. You can use your own paper, it doesn't matter. You each, there's only one pen.
Do we each get our own piece of paper?
Yes, each person has their own piece of paper. So it's an individual game within your group. Yep. Yeah, I think you guys are right. So you each roll. The first person to get a 6 is going to pick up the pen and write. The rest of you are going to roll. We're going to roll the die until you get a 6, and then you get the pen to write. Usually after like the first round, you kind of get it, that first circle. If you feel like it is unfair to randomly choose someone to go first, you can roll the die and highest goes first, or you can just pick someone to go first. It is up to you how competitive you truly are. But you can start. Go ahead, start. Also, you're not shooting craps, so if the dice rolls off the table, you lose a turn. Keep it on the table. Someone finally get a 6? Here. Your own paper. Individual. You're cheating. You're going against your people in your group.
Oh, now I get
This is also a perfect activity for Friday night around the dinner table. Or when your school goes into lockdown.
We need some red cups filled with some liquid.
We are not condoning this as a drinking game.
I need a cigarette after this.
You gotta, you did. I almost took it, sorry. I
I don't want you to win. We'll just skip you. 64? Ooh.
Oh, you.
Not so much.
No, no one's I haven't heard a curse word yet either. Do you win?
I've never written so fast in my life.
We have a winner over here. Keep going, other teams.
Sure, I got all the numbers.
You can pick a prize if you want.
They're on 60, whatever that thing
I'm
is.
on 72.
72.
Winner, you can grab a prize.
She's writing with a different, she doesn't like ours. Is that you?
No.
Every role is independent. So you have a 1/6.
Lose a turn, lose a turn.
Yeah, baby.
She should have rolled it. Go ahead and roll again, because I screwed up the order.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay.
She's gonna get it.
You guys are so positive over here. We lost.
This actually got me stressed,
That's the point.
according to
That's the point.
I'm more stressed to see. Look,
See?
it wants to pull it.
Yeah, yours is probably going to change because you were done fast, but the whole point is to stress them out, and then we're going to do a relaxation technique. So it's the entire point. Yeah, and it usually works.
how bad.
It almost
You
works.
made a joke that they may be so valid, but
Yeah. No, it's actually funny. I will say like 90% of the time they work for me. But there's always like one that like doesn't change. And but for the most part they usually work. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, mine almost always is because my skin's always really cold. So like, yeah, but a lot of times they work, and that's why I like using them. In the curriculum, these are separate activities. So you do the dots, you explain them, the game is separate, and then the relaxation technique is separate. But we found that if you put them all together, it's much more, yeah, it makes sense, especially to kids. Yes, exactly. They love this game. Love them. And then they'll be like, can we play again? Can we play it last week? Can we play it like the last session? They love it. And you don't need anything except a dice and a pen and a paper. Like, you don't need anything. I will say the worst it's ever gotten out of hand was I did it with a group of peer leaders, and they were out of control. And I was like, yeah, and the adults do get way more competitive then. But they love this game. So I've had teachers use it in like, they take this and use it as like a, downtime activity. Yeah. You don't need anything. I always say you could go to Goodwill. Almost every Goodwill has like bags of dice. I mean, you can order them on Amazon too, but I always see it at Goodwill because people give board games and stuff and they're missing pieces, so they bag all the dice together for like $1. You can get like 20 dice. Yeah. How are we doing? We have a winner from every team?
Mine was disintegrated the whole
All right.
time.
Let me see. Yours is good. Let me see. What I'd like you to look at is your piece of paper, and look at how your numbers started off to versus how they finished. Did you feel your body getting a little tense, a little stress? Those of you who are more competitive than others probably felt more tension and more stress because you wanted to win. Sometimes that's completely evident just in your handwriting.
My daughter actually got more relaxed.
You're done. So you really like competition.
I get all stressed out.
I was going to say, so this group, how many of you, your dot changed at the end of the game? Did anyone look? Did anyone get, this group all got more tense. You got more tense, it went brown. You got more, I was going to say, some people really like competition. Okay? It was already as tense.
What am
How many of us are CPR certified?
All right, what I want you to do now is I want you can go back to where you were sitting, and I want you to get comfortable. Because what we're going to do now is, now that we played a little game to stress you out, now I'm going to do something to try to relax you. And if you do a good job, and your dot's totally functioning the way it should go to blue or purple, because hopefully this relaxes you a little bit. There's no way to dim the lights. It's only turn them off, and then it gets really dark. So just, if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. Otherwise, what I ask you to do is just kind of look down to get out some of the other visual cues that might be around you. Or you can find a comfortable place in the room, wherever you're comfortable. We're going to do a relaxation technique called progressive muscle relaxation. What you do is you tense a muscle for 5 seconds, release it for 10. Tense another muscle for 5, release it for 10. So I will prompt you, but you can do this however you feel comfortable throughout. So again, either eyes closed or just kind of bow your head down to get rid of some distractions. And once you're in a comfortable position, I'm going to ask you to slowly inhale and exhale. I'm going to ask you to take your right hand Clench it into a fist, a light fist. Now I'm going to ask you to clench it as tight as you possibly can. Notice the tension in your fist, your hand, your forearm. Hold that tension and then relax. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing with your left hand. As tight as you possibly can for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax your left hand. Now both hands at the same time, clench them as tight as you can. Feel that tension up through your forearm, and then relax. For your biceps, you're going to bend both arms at your elbows, raise your hands towards your shoulder, and tense both of your bicep muscles in whichever way feels comfortable for you. And hold that for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. For your face, I want you to tighten your face up as tight as you possibly can. Hold that tension in your eyes, your jaw, your forehead, and then release. I want you to take your chin, touch it to your chest. Feel that stretch along the back of your neck. A lot of us hold a lot of tension in our neck. If it feels good to kind of roll your neck a little bit, you can. Hold that tension in that neck and then release. I want you to raise your shoulders up as high as you possibly can. Try to touch them to your ears. And then all at once relax it out. For your chest, I want you to take a deep breath and at the same time pull your shoulder blades together behind your back. Tighten up your back muscles, but release your chest muscles. And then relax. For your back, I want you to arch your back out away from your chair and feel the tension along your spine. And relax. With your feet flat on the floor, I want you to press those feet into the floor and feel that tension up your legs. Tense all of those muscles from your feet up into your thighs. And then relax. If you feel tension in any other part of your body, you can tense it, relax it, and repeat. I want you to take 10 deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, and when you're done, you can slowly open your eyes or lift your head back up. And when you do open your eyes, take a look at that dot. See if it has changed. How do you feel? Relaxed? Anyone ready for bed? Done now? I'm done, right? Checked out? Did anyone's dot change? At least away from brown? No? Relaxation makes her stressed, and stress makes her relaxed. You're overworked. You need a break. I was going to say, you're overworked, you need a break when your brain starts making that comparison. Yeah. So again, in the curriculum, all of these activities are actually separate. I find them really impactful to put them all together because what we're doing is we're showing students that there is stress, but we can do something about it that's not turned to a substance, right? So if they're telling me, well, I smoke because it relieves stress, well, really, you just tried a relaxation technique that took 3 minutes, and it also relieves stress. I'm not saying that the game is real life stress, right? But it's worth a shot, right? right? So you could use any relaxation technique in there. So some people can do like a mindful, guided meditation you could find on YouTube or something like that. I did the one that's actually in the curriculum. All right, so that's progressive muscle relaxation, which is research proven that if you tense a muscle and release it, it's tricking your brain into thinking you use that muscle. So a lot of our students who have physical so they punch walls when they're feeling upset, that's because their brain's getting the message they need to use the lactic acid in their muscles. So if we tense them and release them, it technically will trick our brain into thinking we use those muscles. So that's where progressive muscle relaxation comes from. So that is session 5, which is always everyone's favorite session, and they love that game, and they will inevitably ask to play it. And I always say that's something you can do even in the group or not. Kids love that game, and all you need is a dice, which you can order online, or I said the Goodwill usually has like a bag of dice. You can go get like a handful for like $1. All right? So that is session 5. Session 6 is the preparation connection, and this is where the cup activity is the warm-up. Okay? So this is where we start talking about support networks. This is where we talk about effective communication. Okay, and we talk about decision making. Okay, so I'm not going to do think quick. So session 6, we did the cup activity. That's really, and this whole session is really based on decision making. So this is where it's your loss is also found. So this is where we talk about, as Pamela did, about decision making in terms of, what addiction and what our use, how that impacts our decision making as well. So we start with the cup activity. A lot of times we finish with the it's your loss activity, talking about decision making. So that's really session 6. Session 7 is the reflection connection. And this is where we start to kind of to tie up all the loose ends we might have. So this is where we really want them to start thinking about the maintenance stage potentially, but also relapse. So this is where we talk about relapse. We ask them kind of where they're at. But the really thing I love about session 7 is we're really talking about positive self-talk. We're really talking about how important it is to reframe the kind of negative thoughts we all have about ourselves, okay? So there's a trivia game that also goes in this activity that you could use, it's basically like a summary of everything we've done. It's a trivia game. I've had staff put it into like a Jeopardy game or something like that, but it comes with like trivia cards that you could use and give prizes. That kind of sums it up. A lot of times I also do my post-assessment in session 7, partly because I only have access to the students when they're with me in group, and inevitably they'll all be absent in session 8. So I almost always do my post-assessment in session 7, so that way if they are absent in session 8, I at least have still gotten that data that I can get from them if I don't have access. Now, if you're in a school, you could have access to that student more easily to be able to give them that post-assessment. But something I do. But one of the activities I really like in here is praise yourself. So you have them kind of stand in a circle, and I've done this a lot of different ways, but you can have them stand in a circle and say something nice about the person to the left of them, the person to the right of them, and then ask them to say something positive about themselves. Okay? A lot of times that's the harder one for all of us, usually. It's really easy for you to probably compliment people in this room you've never even met before, but if I ask you to compliment yourself in front of other people, it tends to be a really foreign idea, especially for our kids. So really starting to talk about that and reframing that mindset of being a failure versus, no, we have these little successes. And then session 8 is keeping the connection, and this is really kind of the end. This is where we do the post-assessment. It's where it's found in the curriculum. It's also where we do nicotine-free tips. We do a plan for change, which is found in the workbook. So that way, even if we go over their goal, even if they didn't get to their entire goal, this is where you can reframe what that looks like for them. Maybe you didn't get to your whole goal, but you know what? You came every single week. You were engaged every single week, and although maybe you're not quite at that point yet, you've moved from pre-contemplation to contemplation, and that's a success. So reframing what success looks for them is super important in this. Okay, you'll also see in the curriculum that there are booster sessions. You can do a 1 month, 3 month, 6 month, and 1 year follow-up, and there is a lesson plan for each one of those as well with activities. So you could even take those activities, throw them into another session. Again, all this can kind of be put together in ways that you feel like would be more appropriate. A lot of times the booster sessions are really hard to do because it's hard to get the kids back together a year later, but sometimes you can, and sometimes it's nice to bring that group back together to see how everyone's doing. But what I always say with Project Connect and kind of the summary of this entire thing is really helping them move through the stages of change and reframing for them that that's possible, right? So even if they come in saying, like, I'm never going to quit, this is so hard, this is so dumb, I'm never going to do this, right? At the end, I can reframe for them, like, you came every single week. That was enough, right? So that in 20 years from now, if they decide to quit smoking or quit using whatever they're using, they might remember that one little nugget you planted. We actually had, and I always end this training with this kind of example, is we had a trainer who was doing this Project Connect group for years in this school, and I think it was like 8 years later or something, she got an email, so it came through like Karen Admissions, because that's, people don't know if they can't, connect us. That's where they kind of go online and say like, hey, I once had this, and we got this email and said, I once had this girl in my school, this woman came in my school, and she did this group about quitting smoking. Do you remember where she was? She was in this school. And it got filtered down to our department, and the woman who was actually running the group, it was in an Orlando school, was still running groups and still worked for us. And the email said that she was in my group running a quitting smoking group. I had no desire to quit then, but it's now 8 years later and I want to quit, and I remember that she was the person who talked to me about quitting. So I want to know if she can help connect me to resources now that I'm an adult. And that is why we run the group. They might not move through the stages of change, but 10 years from now, they might remember one thing you said and say, you know what, I can do this. It is possible, right? What questions do we have? So again, the nice thing about this is yours. You can do what you want with it. You are taking it with you. If you would like to run it to Fidelity, which I would ask you to do, I am going to have you sign a little form that says if you're going to run the group, you're going to do the best if you can to run it to Fidelity. It's just a signature on the back for me, and then your name on the front. You don't need to worry about all the other stuff. Name, signature is fine. Just saying that you're going to do your best. I don't expect you to run it completely to Fidelity, but you're going to do your best to run it to Fidelity. And again, if you need any further information, I'm going to put my contact information up here on the board. Please jot down my email address. Maybe. Maybe. Maybe not.
It's on the last
It is on the last slide.
of the handout that
Yes.
you gave us,
It is. If I can get it to pull up here, then I will.
You can write on the board if you're not.
Oh, there's a board. Yes, I can. Look at that. Oh, there it is. It's up. It's up. My email is up there. My phone number is up there. If you need anything in a PDF version, again, if you don't want to scan it, just email me. I get people all the time that email me and say, hey, do you have that poster in a PDF? Sure, I'll just shoot you an email with that in there. I can be of any assistance you need. Okay? A lot of times I will send out an email like a month from now saying, hey, you went through this training, how's everything going? If you don't respond to me, that's fine. But if you respond to me and say, hey, I want to know if we have some questions about this. If you're in a region, we have a facilitator and you're thinking, hey, this would be great in my region, reach out to me. The other thing I'm going to sell you on is this training I did today is completely free of charge. Okay, I can do a 6-hour in-service training, this exact training, it's a little bit longer than what we did today, for free, and I can include lunch, so that's my buy-in, for most of you in this room. So if you're interested in that, it's a really great training day for your SAP team, for your guidance counselors, for your school nurses, who a lot of times struggle because a lot of the stuff in an Act 80 day is not always relevant to them. So I do a lot of that kind of group of people, and then you kind of get them on board so that you could run the program in your school, because now it's not just you that knows about the program. So reach out to me, and we can do that. The other thing I want to tell you guys about is on Karen's display table down the hall, you will see information on a new presentation we just put out for vaping. specifically. So we do have a prevention presentation for students specific to vaping, as well as for parents and educators specific to vaping. There is a cost for those, but that's out there, or you could feel free to email me and I'll get in touch with you if there's anything you think that we really need more information about that specifically. In your workbook, I will ask you to fill out one more thing. I'm sorry, there's a lot of paperwork in this training. In your packet, if you don't mind before you leave, I know you have to do an eval online, but there is a specific eval to this program. If you have a minute and you don't mind filling it out, that'd be awesome. You can just leave it upside down on the desk or on your way out, start a pile. It gives us feedback on this training and see what we can make better, how we could do it better, what you would rather, and what was effective and what wasn't. So if you don't mind doing that, that'd be great. And then everything is yours to keep. Please take mints, lollipops, bubble gum, so I don't have to drag it home. And make sure you get scanned on your way out so that you get your credits for being here. And thank you guys, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.